Okay, let's see. Got it. Let's do a quick roll call. I think we're all here. Mr. Kennedy.
Here.
Channing.
Here.
Mr. Platt. Here. Mr. Tyne. I don't see him yet. Hopefully is here. Okay, thank you. Let's look at the agenda for starters. I was going to suggest we might rearrange a little bit, but it sounds like it's all the same folks. Since the bylaws are a kind of an open-ended discussion, I wonder if we could move that down to the end so we can discuss the moratorium, if that worked for folks. So with that, just those initial comments. Any thoughts on the agenda, amendments? Does that be desirable for you guys? Okay. All right, I'm looking for a motion to approve or approve with that amendment.
So moved, Mr. Chair.
Okay, it's been moved. Second. I second. Okay, second by Platt that we go with the agenda as published, with the exception of let's move the item 11 ahead of item 10. I don't have Joe to Blair. I'm going to get outline. Okay, so that moves us into the approval of minutes. Please vote on that. Again, vote on that. Oh, did we not vote to approve the agenda? All right, fair enough. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, aye.
Aye.
Okay. Let us move on to the approval of the minutes. They're quite complicated, so I'm thinking let's correct the things that we can easily, but if there's spots that are just confusing, maybe we defer those and send staff back to listen to the tape. And then just a quick question on the depth of minutes, I guess, what was your philosophy on it? Some of them say discussion took place, some of them give us 3 pages of discussion on what's kind of governing. There wasn't really any. Just what caught your attention? Yeah. Okay. No, I'm a believer in expansive minutes, but I understand it take a lot together. Right, let's just go through them in the order that they were presented. The first set for the November 16 meeting.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, okay.
I would move to approve those minutes with one correction on page 7. The 5th paragraph from the bottom, correct "and" to "an." And with that.
Okay, no, Chris, you already followed? Yep, got it, Marcus. Okay, anything else, Mr. Kennedy?
Pardon?
Was that it?
Yes, that's the only correction I found.
Others? I had a couple. There was one up here where I'm on page 4, towards the bottom of the page. It says, Chairman Hinckley asked Matt Ayers if in his opinion the county can deny an application due to an inadequate review of impacts to water quality. So is WDEQ the sole reviewing authority? Matt Ayers said no. It wasn't clear to me which of those 2 questions he was answering no to. So I don't know if what was the answer there? Is it go back? He or unless Mr. Ayers remember. It could go either way, so we just flag that one further. Let's make sure that the record is clear what he was saying no to. At the top of page 4, end of the first paragraph, discussing Commissioner Hanning's comments, says she can't really answer the question of whether or not the subdivision created an impact. she was ready to approve this application because the commission's working on regulation changes. Is that what she said, or did she was not ready to approve? She was ready. She was. Okay. Does that agree with your memory, Ms. Hanning?
Yeah, that is a correct recollection of what I said. I was ready to approve it.
There are a few little typos, but all right, that's all I had. Anybody else? Can we approve them with the revision, then you go back and figure that out? Yeah. For rules of order, please. Okay. Then we're looking for a motion on the November regular meeting minutes. Chairman,
It's already been moved. Just wait a second.
Second, Mr. Platt, all in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
You've got special meeting number 1 on the 29th. Also, to throw in at this point, a thank you to all of my colleagues. We have had a pile of special meetings here, substantially more than some of you might have thought you were signing up for, volunteer for this assignment. So certainly I hope that the county appreciates patience and diligence with which we try to dispatch our duties. Okay, I'm looking at the 2:15. That's what I'm calling the first of the November 29 minutes. Comments, questions, suggestions?
Mr. Chairman, I move to approve without any corrections or changes.
For a second for that motion. Second. Second by Platt. Further discussion. Ms. Hanning?
Nope, it's all good with me.
Good with that one. Let's take a quick vote. All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, done. Special meeting number 2. That would be the 3 o'clock. And again, let's just have a quick round of comments. Anybody want to correct anything, questions on those? These were a little more expansive. Oh, Mr. Hyams.
Mr. Chairman, page 2, the second paragraph from the top. We're discussing confinement of the applicant. There's a typo that says this can. So in the specific case, the protest.
Yeah, got it. Thank you.
Yes.
That's care. The others, Mr. Kennedy?
None here.
Hanning?
I'm okay with them.
A little lukewarm. We'll go with that. Okay, Mr. Platt. All right, I would like to have to note the presence of John Westheim. He wasn't there initially, but at the top of the minutes, he did not acknowledge his presence. He did not acknowledge that he's there. So I would like the minutes to reflect his presence in whatever way is appropriate. We could add a line when he showed up, maybe he was slightly later.
So what do you mean he didn't acknowledge his presence?
So Byrne at the beginning asked if anyone wanted to make their presence known, and they went through and said their names. He did not do that. I did write his name several times in the minutes.
Yeah. Okay, and where he shows up down below, does he identify? So I know I identified him as there as a principal of EA engineering. He shows up on page 3. My point is simply, I want to appreciate the fact that we had some participation in this meeting by those who weren't associated with this particular application.
Would it help to, if the first time he speaks, I can say with EA or?
Okay, that will satisfy my concern.
If I may interrupt, Commission, just because this is a new format here, whoever spoke from the audience was very difficult to hear. For those online, if you could approach the podium there in the center, it would help
Okay, that was, thank you. Was that me that was speaking, or you meant? Okay, right, let's do that.
You want me to restate that?
I mean, it was just a typo. You want to hear that again?
You're fine. I just trying to presence for your future usage.
Appreciate that and everyone's patience with our new venue here. We're kind of stumbling around a little bit. Top of page 3, good thing that Mr. Hines here. The statement reads, Levi Hines says the DEQ doesn't provide planning and zoning the letter that is provided, and he can't control that. And what letter are we talking about? But that was just an ambiguous statement. Mr. Hyman, you offer us a clarification.
Mr. Chairman, let me look here. I think we were discussing the non-adverse and the,
That was when you were talking about sometimes you get a 15-page letter back, but this time you didn't.
oh, sure, yeah. I think you'd asked about if we received some sort of request for additional information on Owl Acre subdivision from them. And I had said we did not. But I could provide one if we had received one, but I think it was just probably jumbled.
Yeah, let's see, can we offer a correction again, just like these minutes before we leave them to say it correctly? Would it be right to say, Levi Hines says the DEQ did not provide additional questions?
Yeah, and that's fine. I would be, sure. Yep.
Okay, thank you. I think that was the sense of it. Down further on the same page, we have a sentence that reads, Matt Ayers explained that the county cannot replace DEQ as the sole reviewing agency. Is that
Without the delegation.
the sole reviewing agency of septic systems?
Safety and adequacy.
So then the statement that's written would be that you're opining that DEQ is the sole reviewing agency.
Yeah.
Okay, then I'm correction of that language. Ayers explained that the county cannot replace DEQ as the sole reviewing agency. To me, that reads that DEQ is the sole reviewing agency.
It would be that the county cannot assume the role of the sole agency
Without a delegation.
The county can't be the sole.
Yes.
How about if we just made that, Matt Ayers explained the county? I see how you're saying it now. The county cannot become the sole reviewing agency.
Yeah, that would be fine.
That would be correct. Okay, thank you. It's interesting how different people can read the same words and come up with different places, but that's the ambiguity we like to read this. And that's all I had. Okay. I don't know that we had a motion to start that, but maybe we have one if we didn't.
So moved, Mr. Chair.
We have a second. Moved and seconded to approve the special meeting number 2 minutes as corrected, amended. All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Good. Special meeting number 3. We're about to wear all number 29 out.
I will mention that this one is less detailed because they do not report theirs.
Was that right?
That's my knowledge. I couldn't watch it back.
Interesting. Okay. Comments, suggestions, thoughts, corrections, objections on this one?
Mr. Chairman, I move
Move approval, is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion of that? Seeing, hearing none, all in favor say aye.
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 And that moves us to December 2. I'm looking at my notes. Anybody want to weigh in on those?
December 2 or December 5?
December 5, I'm sorry. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I move to approve the minutes of December 5th special meeting.
Is there a second? I second. Okay, I have one comment by way of discussion of that. Middle of page 2, it says the vote was unanimous, but I lost track of the motion.
Commissioner Thine motion, Commissioner Platt second.
There it is, okay. Thank you. Any other discussion of that motion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Thank you. Motion carries. We are through with the special meeting. Let me just add a note at the end of that last set. The minutes correctly reflected that we had not gotten to INSPAR, and to some extent was an oversight on my part, but to another extent it was to trim down the volume of special meetings, the length of those meetings, realizing that it was going to come before us tonight. We didn't need to cover everything just then, so I hope that didn't discomfort anyone. Okay. This gets us to disclosures, conflicts of interest. Mr. Kennedy,
None.
Tang,
None.
Platt, none. And Mr. Tyne is not here yet. As I stated in the last meeting, I don't feel I have any conflicts of interest, but I'm happy to disclose that I've benefited from discussion with various members of the commission. We haven't in any way met collectively, but I have received some valuable input and thank my colleagues for that. All right, moving into the applications portion of our agenda. The procedure will follow as a report from the staff, at which point they will stand for questions, comments from the commissioners, and we'll invite the applicant to stand for questions and offer any additional comments that they please. We'll open the discussion to public comments. Formally, that's a public hearing. We don't declare them in that manner all the time, but that's what we're doing there. If you do want to make a public comment, you'll be asked to state your name and address, and you'll be given 3 minutes to address the topic. And anyone who might be interested in making a public comment, note that there's a general comments opportunity at the end of the meeting, so we like to keep these on topic. Following those public comments, we will close the public hearing and the commission will proceed to discuss the topic and proceed to whatever resolution we think appropriate. And let the record reflect that Mr. Tyne has now joined us. So, looking around for questions, not seeing any, let's proceed to the first one, the Flutie variance request application VAR 0122. Staff presentation by Mr. Wells.
All right, applicant is Michael Flutie, located at 353 Roger Canyon Road. His request is to approve a variance request from the Albany County zoning resolution. Current zoning is split rural residential and agricultural. Current use is residential. Access is from Roger Canyon Road. There were some reviews. The assessor, Chelsea Matthews, had no concerns. Rob Fisher, superintendent of Road and Bridge, had no concerns. Holly Dyer from Laramie Rivers Conservation District had no additional comments other than the ones attached to the subdivision application. And YDOT Taylor McCourt had no comments. Variance requirements, findings. Notice has been provided by posted sign publication and certified mailing as required. Findings necessary for approval. The granting of the variance will not be detrimental to the public health, safety, or welfare, or materially injurious to other properties in the vicinity. The granting of the variance will not constitute a grant of special privilege inconsistent with the limitations on use of other properties in the district. The hardship, which is the basis for the variance application, was not self-inflicted by the applicant, and the granting of the variance is justified for one or more of the following reasons. Strict interpretation or enforcement of the development standards would result in practical difficulty or unnecessary physical hardship inconsistent with the purposes of this resolution. exceptional or extraordinary circumstances or conditions applicable to the site of the variance that do not generally apply to other properties in the same district, and strict interpretation or enforcement of the development standards would deprive the applicant of privileges enjoyed by other property owners in the same district, or the variance will bring the applicant into substantial parity with other property owners in the same district. Findings of fact: the findings necessary for approval, applicant responses, and staff analysis as referenced in this report are affirmatively adopted as findings that the applicant has provided the board with adequate information, that the requested and required findings, documentation, notice, and notations have been satisfied by the applicant, and the same are incorporated herein. Conclusions of law: the applicant is proceeding in accordance with and is in compliance with the requirements of the Albany County Zoning Resolution, Chapter 5, Section 14. Staff analysis: the applicant is requesting a variance from the Albany County Zoning Resolution, Chapter 3, Section 3D6. Quote, a site-specific investigation shall be performed for all APOZ development proposed within the APOZ. Following the lawsuit that was ruled against the county on November 16th, void ab initio, the western boundary of the Casper Aquifer Protection Area reverted back to the western boundary established in the 2008 Casper Aquifer Protection Area. This moved the line almost all the way to the eastern border of this parcel. Future development of the larger parcel of the proposed subdivision would be limited by the following. Future subdivision would require a zoning district amendment from agricultural to rural residential or smaller. Go through the major subdivision process because they could not subdivide an already subdivided lot without going through the major process, which would require DEQ review and recommendation and other additional standards. And the owner could not put a second dwelling on the large piece of the subdivision because they would not have the 70 acres needed to put another dwelling on the property. Based on the limitations of what could be done on the larger parcel, staff's opinion is that the necessity of a site-specific investigation would not provide additional benefit to the review of the subdivision application. Staff recommendation is to approve the Flutie variance request BAR 0122, adopting and incorporating the staff analysis, findings of fact, and conclusions of law as each are stated in the staff report.
Thank you. Questions for staff? Mr. Kennedy?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And this is questions probably from Matt. And that's about the statement that the owner could not put a second dwelling on the larger piece of the subdivision. Is that true in all cases? And the example I would give is a family division of 5 acres.
So I believe when for the 70 acres, I believe that did you read this? Yeah. Okay, I believe that's referring to the aquifer protection overlay zoning amendments, which are going forward, where there is that 35 acre per density.
It's not that right now.
Oh, it is.
Yeah, under agriculture.
Oh, under agricultural, that's true. And obviously you cannot use zoning to, I guess, prohibit like a family subdivision exemption under those exemption statutes. So that wouldn't be applicable in that case either. Does that sufficiently answer it?
That does. Thank you.
Other questions, comments? Mr. Kennedy?
Nothing further. Thank you.
At this time, you'll have another chance. Ms. Hanning?
Mr. Chair, I guess I don't have any questions at this time.
Platt?
So just want to walk through, make sure I understand this. The new lot 2 being created by the proposal lies would lie entirely outside APOZ, correct?
The smaller lot?
Right.
Correct, yeah.
And nothing's going to change by the subdivision of the remainder of the property, lot 1.
Correct, because it would require other processes in order to do it.
Okay, so my question is, why is this SSI even required then?
Because it's partially in the APOZ.
Lot 2's not.
It's a subdivision.
And I believe I read, I'm just going from this, I read that the county requested SSI.
We would.
So that was a planning staff request?
Correct.
Okay, that's all the questions I had.
Mr. Tyne?
Not at this time.
Yeah, let me just follow up, and I had the same question that Mr. Platt. So, and I guess as a note for staff reports, for those of us of limited memory, a little more history would be helpful just to remind us. I mean, you guys are all in it all the time, but just somewhere early on in your staff reports, if there's one of these chewed up before, it would be helpful to get us on the page by just a little, like say, permitting history, maybe a standard edition. So remind us what we did before. I thought we rezoned the west piece residential.
Yeah.
Okay, and left so that's the piece that's being subdivided.
The whole parcel is being subdivided. You're taking one parcel and turning it into two.
But the east piece remains zoned agricultural.
Correct.
Okay, it seemed like we kind of did this, which I guess we basically did. And then I'm totally in agreement. There's just no reason in the world to do an SSI for that piece that remains agricultural. So if other comments from commissioners, from staff, does the applicant or their representative want to add anything to this? Being done, we'll open it for public comment. Do we have any public online or in person that wishes to comment? Going once, going twice, seeing none, let's close our public comment, and we're open to commission discussion. How do you wish to dispose of this?
May I ask a question on that?
Certainly.
Matt, is it really correct that this subdivision, we actually have to have an SSI?
Yeah, so it's, the requirement.
Not down, Joe.
The requirement, under the ABOZ regulations as they are, is that if any piece of property, is within the ABOZ boundary, the requirements shall apply to the entirety of the parcel. But obviously, where this development is occurring is wholly outside of that ABOZ boundary. So the variance would be required to inhibit it. Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, in my opinion, this is prudent for form. And therefore, I move to approve, or recommend approval about Board of County Commissioners approve the preliminary request BAR -01-22, adopting and incorporating the staff analysis, findings of fact, and conclusions of law as each are stated in the staff report.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I second.
By Commissioner Platt, second by Commissioner Tyne to this one forward with a favorable recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners. Other discussion of that motion? Seeing none, no hands raised. All in favor, say aye. Well, no, Mr. Kennedy. Let's be more formal about this. Looks like he is dropped off. Ms. Hanning?
Aye.
Platt?
Aye.
Time?
Aye.
Eagley votes aye. Perhaps our connection is lost, but it's enough to carry the day in any case. So let the record reflect the unanimous decision of those voting. Moving on to the next public application. This was held over from November meeting. Does the staff have a further report here in November, but do you want to go through what's new, what should we be thinking about? Is there a staff report on this? That's fine. Okay, so we should just have the staff questions.
Sorry. No, I don't have anything else to add past what was discussed in November. There was more letters passed back and forth, so if you want to maybe go over that, I think that would be fun.
Yeah, or go ahead. You've got the sequence in your mind. You want to do it? Or do you want me to? Go ahead. All those letters come through your office. All that. Thank you.
Yes, with the preliminary plat came before this board in May, and I believe the Board of County Commissioners in June. This board approved this application with a condition stating that the chair would write a letter about, I don't know the exact wordage, the inadequacies of wastewater.
The concerns of the commission.
Sure, about the concerns from the commission. However, it's not clear if the board passed those conditions. And then when this became a final plat, when the final plat came forward, we received a letter that day from Weston Engineering responding to those concerns. And then a new letter was drafted and sent December 5th from Planning and Zoning Commission to the applicant on their concerns with, I guess on their reply. And then there was another reply on December 8th from the applicant's representative.
That's what brings us into today.
Correct.
Thank you. Other questions for Mr. Harris or Mr. Williams as we can get started? What? You're waving at me.
No.
Keep his hands up. You just thought I was the grand. It is joined. Oh, all right, yeah, let the record reflect Mr. Kennedy's, I don't know if you just lost your connection there for a minute, but we would have to vote without Mr. Kennedy.
What was the outcome, Mr. Chairman?
Then we approved the Flutie variance without exception.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, Zoom stopped working and Microsoft asked me to restart, so here we are again.
We'll try not to do anything important in your absence. I had a variety of comments myself, but maybe, well, let's maybe hold off on those. Does the applicant want to say anything at this point, or do you want to wait until we wade in, or what's your pleasure?
He's asking.
We're going to have a kind of a back and forth there, but go ahead. Introduce yourself and go right ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Dustin Richards. I'm with Henson McMillan. I'm here on behalf of Megan Getz to represent the applicant for this. We would just really request that this commission, well, I guess first of all, I should say, I'm just getting up to speed on this, but after reviewing, I think we all appreciate the work that you guys do with investigating these issues and making sure that things are being considered before just being approved. That's a good approach to this, and so we appreciate all the back and forth that we have, getting all this information out there for everybody to share, learn more about the process. But yes, we would definitely appreciate the approval for this to move to the next step. It's been a long road. I think it'll be a minimal disturbance that's reported in all the recommendations. So I guess we just respectfully request this commission approve the recommendations. Proceed.
Thank you. Mr. Hyman, do you have something to say at the outset, or?
I'm say at the outset, I'm happy to discuss questions as they come up.
Okay, are there any public comments? I'm assuming not. So hearing no objections, let's wade into this, and I don't know. Well, all right, let me just give you my 2 bits worth. Well, do other commissioners want to weigh in at this point, or shall I proceed? Okay. See, no, it's all right.
Mr. Chair, can I ask a question?
Mr. Kyle.
Yeah, thank you. I was aware of the letter that you sent. I was not aware we had a reply. Is that not contained in the packet?
It is in the title. We sent, we had the meeting on the 29th, at which we were
Right.
requesting our concerns in writing. We did that on December 5, and Mr. Hines replied by letter of December 8.
It's in the agenda.
And
If you go through the packet.
Okay. I thought it was a separate thing, sorry.
It would be it's in the packet. It's in the packet.
Well down.
Yeah, the packet was done in pieces.
You know, these packets get a little hairy sometimes.
Okay, did you have something else you wanted to say at this point, or you want to?
No, I just wanted to make sure I was on the same page.
Yeah, it is my intention to respond to each point there, and in fact, I don't know that a point by point is useful at this juncture, but just for the record, I would like to note that we are in conversation with DEQ about their reviews and the binary nature of their response to us. So there's been discussion of that, and I certainly don't have any quarrel with the applicant's consultant's representation of that as a sometimes fractured and perhaps not entirely open process. So please be assured that we are trying to sort that out with the folks over at DEQ. A large part of the response that we've received to our concerns run to this is the way it's been done. You've approved half a dozen of these. DEQ has no trouble with it, and therefore we should proceed. I think that's logically not quite tight. If there's an issue that we identify, we are under no obligation to continue to accommodate that. And I would also note that for the first time in my familiarity with planning and zoning, we have on the Planning and Zoning Commission the expertise to provide a serious peer review, both to DEQ and to our applicants, and that is new. I think that's a good thing, and I hope that the resolution of it will be a higher level of scientific discussion, at least between all parties. Although neither the applicant or DEQ may appreciate those peer reviews, they're getting them anyway. And I think it's fair to say there's generally been an increased concern for the impacts of development on groundwater quality in Albany County. And that too, I think, is a good thing. A concern for cumulative impacts, a concern for aquifers other than those presently being used. And some of those may be outside the current regulatory framework, so I don't need to represent those concerns as necessarily actionable. But they do present the county a challenge in our review of the regulatory framework, as well as of individual applications. And again, we should be assured that we are in the process of reviewing that regulatory framework. And as I've invited in past sessions, we planning and zoning have a set of changes in subdivision regulations out for public review as we speak. And certainly welcome anyone's comments in that regard. Also, just for the record, it's not the applicant's consultant responded to us with a number of examples, but the applicant's consultant's universe is fairly narrow because we don't tend to see one another's work. All of the examples are chosen from Weston's background, except one, which is the spotted horse, which I sent to Mr. Hodges just as a professional courtesy. Here's another one you might want to look at. Over the course of looking at this, though, I also remind myself of a subdivision quite different than the ones that were brought forward in that December 8 letter, specifically the paddocks. I'm looking at their DEQ application from 2007. So again, it isn't quite true that we've always done it the same way. That the paddocks is somewhat to the south and west of this property, but rather like the other ones that were brought forward in the letter of December 8. And not surprisingly, I'm now quoting from that, and staff has offered to scan the document that I only have hard copy and make that available to all of our libraries. So I'm quoting from that 2007 report. Well logs and SEO records indicate the red beds aquifers are confined by clay and limestone strata in the area of the proposed subdivision. So common theme there. In this case, however, the consultants went forward with what they called an unconfined aquifer investigation. They dug several test pits 10 to 15 feet deep. Some of these pits filled with groundwater. Based on that, they recognized that there was a shallow water bearing zone, dignified with an aquifer or not. The obvious and well documented fact of there being confined aquifers throughout these areas, and that most of the wells that one examines included those aquifers. So if one looks at the plethora of wells that are available, looking for evidence of confinement, it is certainly there and has been brought to our attention by the consultant. If one goes into that same body of data and looks specifically for evidence of an unconfined water bearing zone, one finds evidence of that as well. And a couple of those were mentioned in our letter. So we have this situation of a shallow water bearing zones that do receive effluent from the surface as they receive rainfall. And the question I think before us is their status. In this case, back in 2007, quote, during a groundwater investigation of the site of adjacent South Bend subdivision, WDEQ questioned whether there was hydraulic communication between the confined red beds aquifer and the unconfined aquifer. So there again, DEQ is now recognizing that there was an unconfined aquifer. Continuing, DEQ suggested that a pump and recovery test be conducted in the red beds aquifer while observing response in the unconfined unit, but not unreasonable to proceed. And as that investigation continued, they described for us a site visit between the consultants and Water Quality Division District Engineer at the time, Lou Harmon. These discussions, quoting from the report, these discussions culminated in a site tour by Mr. Harmon and the other parties above. During the visit to the site, Mr. Harmon expressed concerns about the validity of falling head permeability tests conducted by WRI used to determine hydraulic conductivities for the soils encountered on the site, and suggested that more realistic conductivities might be obtained by drilling wells on the site and conducting slug tests. And the Shutterleys and John and David Evans agreed to this, and John Evans contacted Watts Well Service to install the wells. So in this case, they proceeded to drill wells. Again, something that we kind of have been talking about. Well, that could never happen. Well, it could, and it was required by DEQ, or at least strongly suggested. And then my final quote from this statement was asking themselves, what becomes of the septic system effluent? It simply disappears, is obviously contrary to the mass balance. In this case, they note the higher concentration of nitrates that they observed from the pits, quote, is probably due to groundwater mounding at the septic system at the existing site. So I just offer that into the record that there are different ways of looking at these. Different consultants have looked at them in different ways over the years. And going back to our December 5 work session, DEQ has looked at things quite differently over the years. Where are we now? I think the technical errors identified by the commission back in May have now been addressed by the consultant. In the process, I think we've exposed some issues that we should address going forward, and these may not be problems for Mr. Howell. I say addressed rather than resolved. I'm not convinced the issue of aquifer confinement has been fully sorted out at the site. For example, by this or previous applications in the area. But I think we, the commission and DEQ, need to do more thinking on this point, and I'm not inclined to weigh Mr. Howell down on that complex issue. So now speaking only for myself, I don't feel that the December letter was entirely responsive and retired the issue from the field. I don't entirely agree with the concepts of approach. And we could go through the December 8th letter item by item if the commission or the applicant wants to, but I am prepared to move forward with this application. So, Mr. Himes, are you you want to respond to that, or would you like us to proceed?
I'm happy to, Mr. Chairman, to talk about the paddocks if you'd like. The reason why I referenced those 3 studies wasn't just because Weston, those 3 studies found this subdivision. That's actually why I picked those. And then I did use John Westsign's report for the spot for south because 1, you sent it to me, 2, it happens to be a half mile southeast. He also referenced the same confined nature of the shallow aquifer that we're discussing. So I figured we've got John Westside on the east side saying that it's confined. I'm saying it's confined in the middle. And we've got Sue Spencer and other Weston employees saying it's confined on the west side. So I'm just trying to illustrate that, we've got lots of folks saying that things are confined there. I am not saying that as we go to the west, things may become unconfined or there may be some perched water there or to the west. But at our site and in the area that we're concerned about, we show confinement, I feel like, which is what we addressed in my letter. We feel like we have complied with the requirements and done our best to try and address you guys' concerns. I'm happy to look at reports and that sort of stuff. I mean, I think it's great if we do all have some peer review of each other's stuff, and I think that's wonderful. But in the end, DEQ found this as being adequate. I feel like we've addressed your concerns. We would like to see this move forward in a positive way.
Certainly. Welcome to those understandable comments. Would others on the commission like to comment on where we are and where we're headed?
I'd like to ask a couple questions. First of all, where'd you get your reference from paddocks? Is that from our records? It's that, or
No, this is, those of us who've been in this game for 40 years
yeah,
have
no,
accumulated
I'm
a certain
curious.
number of these, but no.
where the information comes from, so I know where it came from.
Yes, no, you don't, but as I said, Mr. Gertz, I think, generously offered to scan the whole thing at the counties, and I would like to see us collectively building a library of these so that we aren't hindered by our own
So
path.
again, that site, there was water, shallow water, as opposed to the house site where there is no shallow water. We're gonna try to live here. There's a difference there.
Well, yeah, I don't, but I would quibble with that.
No, I
characterization.
agree.
These guys have looked harder for that.
I understand that, but there was water
And they did
there.
fight this, but
Yeah.
we don't know whether that's true at this site. Is that fair?
Well, we did dig test pits per DEQ's requirements. They were 10-foot deep test pits done out on the Howell Acres subdivision, and there was no water.
That's why I was gonna actually ask that.
Yeah. Yeah, so part of the chapter 23 requires us to dig a 10-foot deep pit to verify what is there at the surface and then also what we're into to make sure we don't have bedrock at 10 feet or those sorts of things or shallow water. So when we dug those pits, there was no signs of water. We didn't see any caliche. We didn't see anything that demonstrated a shallow. Now, as you go to the west, there are spots, as you know, where there are some ponds that even shows up on the topo sheets. There's some ephemeral drainages. There's some little ponding down there, and shallower water at the paddocks is pretty common. There's some pretty leachy. Yeah, there's some pretty swampy areas down there. Now, that could be from a number of things. Just because there is some water there doesn't also necessarily mean there's an aquifer there. We could have some perched water sitting on top of those less permeable sediments. There could be, an ephemeral drainage that's running some water through some shallow stuff. But at our site, we didn't encounter anything that demonstrated shallow.
So have you done other work in that area? And this, when I say that area, I mean the area sort of generally where this is in, south of interstate and east of the railroad. That greater area.
Yep.
And so you're probably pretty familiar with, that area too. Are you aware of any wells at all out there that have been contaminated?
No,
I said wells, I mean wells being used for domestic consumption.
sure. No, I don't know of any out there that are suffering from any sort of contamination. Now, there are some reports. There's a rancher that had a sheep farm down there, and he actually reported that the Strong well, which is farther away, was drilled into the shallower stuff.
and it actually had such poor water quality that it killed its ram. So it, again, we start to look at those things of what's classified as an aquifer and drinkable and what is going to kill our livestock. So I don't know of any offhand that have been contaminated now. Yeah, well completions, old wells, there's some wells. There used to be a dairy farm right in this area back in the 1930s. And they actually referenced a couple of wells that were flowing 180 gallons a minute back in the 30s that, you know, there. So,
Bert, is there a reporting mechanism for that offset wells do get contaminated? They get reported somewhere.
No, domestic wells are not, there's no follow-up unless somebody volunteers that. And we kick around things like a 10 milligram per liter nitrate standard. That only is a standard for public water systems.
so if you're a
if you're
domestic well,
domestic-
you could drink that and none of us would necessarily know.
And you'll recall, speaking to my fellow commissioners, at the Cottontail, we ran into this and it was unclear whether we were looking at a perched water table or just a rotten water table. And at least my memory of how we proceeded with that was to concede that the nitrate impacts of septic system effluent were entering a very marginal situation, and therefore it was not something we needed to worry about. But that harks back to my earlier comments. I think we at DEQ, there needs to be some sorting out of, are you protecting aquifers that are being used, or are you protecting aquifers in a general way that might be used in some place down the road? And those lines are not as clear as we might have. I see Mr. Hunt's nodding his head. I appreciate that. Okay, other comments from commissioners? Questions for Mr. Hines? Thank you for making yourself available.
Absolutely.
Well, I have one other question.
Sure.
Go ahead.
So again, on site, we're talking about a layer of dry alluvium top, and there's upgraded septic systems. Is there any way to determine if anything's coming into the site upgraded?
So the way a septic system works is you have to have some saturation there to move. So part of what we do in our modeling is we determine a hydraulic gradient, which essentially means how the water is flowing under the ground. And we have a map in our application that has an arrow. So what that's saying is that if that leachate had reached into that area that was saturated, then it would provide a method of transport for that stuff. Their leachate isn't just going to go out horizontally by itself. Everything has to work underground. So it is going to go down. There's going to be a bit of movement, but there's no hydraulic gradient if we have no water to push that out. So at this point, we're not aware of anything that's coming in. Of course, there isn't a whole lot of density to the east of this subdivision. Most everything out there is pretty sparsely populated. However, what we did is when we drilled the well in the subdivision, we sampled the producing interval, which is in that confined layer, which then yielded an ambient nitrate background.
Right, I understand that, but I'm wondering if stuff can or does in fact come down to the dry alluvium, either because of seasonal water or because of a rain event or anything. I'm just curious if there's, if you look at that, you see any traces of stuff coming into the site from above, which makes me think about what happens, below this site in turn.
Yeah.
That's why I'm asking.
Yeah, exactly. And so again, if there was a lot of transport through that area, we would have seen signs of it. We dug our pit.
Okay, that's why.
So we would have seen some sort of, mineral staining. We would have seen some sort of leachate, things like that would demonstrate that we've had water here and moving through. That wasn't seen. So not saying that at some point at depth, things don't move a little. I mean, that's the whole theory behind the gradient and that sort of stuff. But this leachate is going to be separated from what they're using for the drinking water.
I understand that completely. That's how that works.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't have any questions.
Others on the commission? Questions for Mr. Hines? Mr. Kennedy?
None, thank you.
Sam?
Mr. Chair, I don't have any questions of the applicant right now. Thank you.
Time.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get all my pieces together here. So the water comes from the east and goes to the west, right? And you said there's not anything much off to the east, up gradient?
No,
Is that correct?
I didn't say that there wasn't anything, but there isn't much there. It's not really populated out there.
Well, you said nothing off to the east, but okay, there's not much population. And I'm probably suffering from early onset, but what was the nitrate concentration? What was the nitrate concentration in the test well? Wasn't that like 3.5?
3.7 and
3.7.
Okay, 3.7, thank you. And you said that was natural background, is that correct?
Well, no, that's what's there now because there's no development right there in the subdivision, obviously. So that's what we use as an ambient background nitrate level.
Okay, and so you're aware that's not an ambient background nitrate concentration in the aquifer, right?
I'm having a hard time hearing you. Not an ambient background of the aquifer?
Yeah, the aquifer in general, here in the aquifer we're all living on.
Well, it depends on what we're defining as the aquifer. If we're defining the aquifer as the first water, which is the Pharrell section that they completed the well through, that is the ambient nitrate. That is what's existing there now.
So where do you feel that nitrate came from?
Where do I feel that nitrate? What's that?
Yeah, where did what was the source of that nitrate? Because all the data for the aquifer as a whole suggests that in this aquifer, the background nitrate concentration is between 1 and 2.
Sure.
And so we have twice that. So I'm kind of wondering, where did the extra come from? What's unique about this area that provides such a high background nitrate?
Well, if we actually tend to see a higher nitrate background in red beds, and there's some speculation as to what interaction ferric iron has on denitrification, which tends to have a higher background nitrate level than, say, the Casper. I'm not sure where it comes from, but all I can report is what the ambient is there at the time of drilling that well.
Thank you. So I'm also struggling with the water's coming from the east and it's going to the west, and you talk about discharge historically of springs at the surface, which makes sense. Water's got to go someplace. And you're basically contending to us that the water is historically coming down from the east, rolling out to the west, bubbling up at the surface in springs, which we're all familiar with in the area, at least historically. And therefore, the septic tank effluent though doesn't get into this aquifer system, which is expressing water upwards in a natural state. That's what I'm hearing, is that this septic tank effluent just goes down and goes someplace, piles up, I guess, until there's got enough of a gradient to move laterally. Is that correct?
Well, I didn't say anything about the springs bubbling up anywhere. So,
well, no, you just mentioned, excuse me, you just mentioned historically in the 30s that there was a ranch where they had spring, right?
No, I said a well, the Strom well.
I'm sorry, I misunderstood you then. So my problem here is that you are postulating.
Respond before we're kind of piling on top of each other. It makes it hard for us to understand.
You're right. I'm having a little problem on this end too. So please go ahead.
Just give yourself a pause between you and Mr. Himes. Helpful for everybody. Go ahead, please, Mr. Tyne.
Thank you. So you're telling us that historically there were springs and shallow wells, that there are shallow occurrences of groundwater, that the overall gradient is east to west and it has to discharge upward at some point, I'm assuming, and I'm letting you clarify that for me, that this water, this mass of water has to come out off to the west as the land drops off. Is that correct?
Well, I didn't reference anything about springs. All I referenced was there is a reported well out there that is completed more shallowly that has such bad nitrates that it killed livestock. That was what I was referencing. I didn't say anything about springs. This is confined at this location. Now, there is a potential that somewhere as we go to the west, there could be some perched water. There could be something that is completely unrelated to this confined interval. What we're looking at is within this subdivision boundary, this is confined. The first water was reached at depth that's separated and it has head pressure on it. It meets the definition by textbook definition of confinement.
And you would say it's locally confined or just more aerially confined? What's our size of confinement by your definition?
Well, in my response in the 8th letter, I point out that 2,200 feet to the north, 5,000 feet south, and then Wetstein reported a half a mile to the east that it's all confined. So at least locally, I mean, again, we're mincing, what are we calling regionally, locally? All I can do is point out what I did in the letter, which is, looking at these wells that are up to 5,000 feet away, they're confined. Wetstein said that it was confined to the east. We're operating off of the assumption that this well also meets that same standard, that it's confined.
All right.
Now, as we all know, as we work in Laramie, as we get closer to the Laramie River, things are going to get shallower out that way, but that's not where we're looking here.
No, so just so I'm clear, we're talking about a mile to a half mile kind of area that we're sampling.
Yeah, so that Terry number 1 well is located 2,240 feet to the north. And then the other well that Wilhelm number 1, the Beardsley number 1 well is located 5,700 feet south. So, and it's kind of south and just slightly east. So on a regional scale, it does show confinement.
All right, thank you very much for clarifying that for me.
Absolutely.
No further questions, Mr. Chair.
Okay, others back around. Now, let's hold that thought. Let's officially take public comment. I'm not seeing any public to interfere, but going once, going twice. All right, so then we'll close public comment and back to the commission, and we're looking for a way forward. What say you?
Mr. Chairman, I motion that we move to recommend to the Board of County Commissioners approval of the Howell Acres subdivision final plat application SD-08-22 and subdivision permit adopting and incorporating staff analysis, findings of fact, which the law is stated in the staff report.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, so moved and seconded that we move this forward with an approval. Further discussion? Ms. Hannon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to say, first of all, I'm inclined to vote yes for this, but I did want to just make a statement for the record about my general philosophy about confined versus unconfined aquifers. When I think about our role in protecting water for the citizens of the county, I take a very conservative stance And that conservative stance would be that we strive to protect all water, perched or otherwise, because people do have wells that are screened across these intervals. In the future, more wells could be completed in those zones. And I think philosophically, it would be more beneficial if the county, and I know we don't have this in our regs, and we need to continue to improve our regulation changes, but to be conservatively protective, it would be most conservative to assume that perhaps you see locally confining conditions, but that really what we're talking about here is a leaky, unconfined aquifer system with perched layers that connect to others, that wells withdraw from, and therefore they are aquifers because people are using the water out there. I think in this case, we don't want to put this on the applicant, and that we have regulation changes afoot. And I have some ideas for further changing those to maybe tighten down some of these assumptions, because this would have been a different process if we had all shown up agreeing that let's call it a leaky connected aquifer system. And that would remove this argument of what's confined, what's not confined. And just to go back to this, one of the special meetings we had, there was discussion about how the DEQ regulators, some are adamant on not calling things confined and others will agree to calling things confined. And so we can see that at DEQ, there's a variety of opinions on that. And I just want to state for the record that my personal philosophy is that we ought to be protecting all of the water that can be withdrawn through a well for future and potential use, as well as the present uses. And that it would be more beneficial in protecting county residents if we assumed that all of this was connected. So like I said, I'm ready to vote in favor of this, primarily because I'm heartened by the lot sizes being proposed and knowing that that affords a certain amount of dilution. But in general, I don't know that I was satisfied with the response to the letter that we in another special meeting agreed to send out. But again, I'm ready to vote and have this go forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Others? Mr. Time, Mr. Kennedy? Let me just add one thought as I'm paging through my markup of the December 8th letter. Mr. Time reported to us that he had spoken with Dennis Lewis at DEQ, who opined that the internal communications regarding the review of an application are not public and are for internal use only. I have no reason to quarrel with what Mr. Himes says Mr. Lewis said, but what Mr. Lewis said is wrong. Those are available and have been obtained through records requests at various times. I don't need to argue the point, but just to not leave the record clear on this. Also, Mr. Himes reports that Mr. Lewis said he told me the same thing. He did not. So I'm happy to proceed from there. If you feel compelled to respond, you're welcome to, but you don't need to, and we can move on. It's your pleasure.
Mr. Chairman, that's fine. And I also spoke to Lily, which I referenced in the letter saying I would leave a message, and she was, after I wrote this letter, she told me the same thing. They're internal documents, they will not release them. She said they have been obtained in the past, and that was not correct. So, yeah, I'm just reporting what I was told. So,
Fair enough.
yeah, absolutely.
Yes, and let's move forward. We have a motion on the floor. Let's show something that's relevant to our motion. Okay, other comments within the bounds of the motion that's before us? Seeing none. Mr. Kennedy, how say you?
Aye.
Ms. Hannon,
Aye.
Mr. Platt. Aye. Mr. Time,
No,
Hinckley, aye. Motion carries. Thank you for your attendance. Moving on to the next item. We can take a short break. We've been at this for, we can proceed a little further unless somebody's lobbying otherwise. Okay. Next up is the Einspar preliminary plat application SD 0222. This isn't, what's before us isn't the application itself, it's simply a letter that we drafted in response to a request at the November meeting. That letter has been distributed in draft. Would the staff like to comment on that in any way? Are there questions for staff? Thank you, Mr. Richards.
So at the last planning and zoning regular meeting, the Einspar subdivision preliminary plat came before the commission, and it was approved with the condition that the chair would write a letter explaining the planning and zoning's concerns about the application. And this is the drafted letter. So yeah.
Okay. Just a quick editorial note, it would, at the end, the last sentence reads, this letter was developed, blah, 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 that should be altered to be a regular meeting, December 14th. So just a small thing as it goes forward. Questions, staff, comments? Okay, let's give the applicant an opportunity to weigh in. If you feel that's necessary, Mr. Krimscher, their representative, Mr. Ralph online. I think we're happy to proceed to deliver the letter and let it flow from there. What's any thoughts that you'd like to share with us?
I have no additional thoughts at this time. I'm just open to hearing the letter.
Mr. Grimes?
Mr. Chairman, nothing at this point.
Okay. I don't have any further comments. Let's move forward with a suggested action, perhaps. Would anybody like to propose?
Mr. Chair, I move to approve the letter regarding the Einspar subdivision, Wyoming Department of Environmental Quality, Chapter 23 report with amendments to the date and the final sentence of the letter, changing it from the special meeting date to today's regular meeting date.
Thank you. Is there a second? Second by Platt. Further discussion of that motion? Hearing, seeing none. Mr. Kennedy.
No.
What was that?
No.
Ms. Hanning?
Aye.
Mr. Platt? Aye. Mr. Time?
aye.
Hinckley votes aye, 4-1, motion carries. Thank you. Let me just continue this item briefly while we're assembled here. As I've indicated, I have been in correspondence with DEQ. So let me ask my colleagues, do you have any discomfort with how we are proceeding to try to engage DEQ in this? In my case, it's something I've been working on for 5 years long before I joined the commission, but I don't want to proceed as a commissioner without consensus here. And if you would like to withhold that, then I can proceed as an individual. But I just thought this was an opportunity to get a little feedback from my colleagues. How do you think we should continue to engage DEQ in this discussion? Ms. Platt, you got something to add?
This is kind of a break. I mean, it relates also. I would just like to ask Mr. Hine if he has any feedback for us in terms of how we might have done things differently or to improve our processes for voiced applicant. Is that fair enough?
Well, let's stick to the point. At this point, how do we want to proceed? And Mr. Himes wrote us a letter making it quite clear that it's certainly not his responsibility as a consultant for his client, but he may be willing to support our efforts otherwise. Sure. So, what do we want to do? Sandy?
Mr. Chair, I guess I would hope that we could maybe have a second work meeting with DEQ like we had last February and see if we can get some of those cars out of the garage. I think in hearing Mr. Heim explain some of the iterative process that goes on behind the scenes, I feel it leaves us with an incomplete public record if we're getting an application with certain parameters being put in the model, but DEQ is doing their own parameters and coming up with an answer. It leaves us with an incomplete public record that I think is harmful to all of us. And at a minimum, I would hope that we could find a way for DEQ to make that iterative process a public process, a defensible public process. Otherwise, we're left with an incomplete record. But aside from that, I think we really left things off with the cars parked in that garage on many items. And I think we really need to figure out how to move forward on them. And I appreciated that DEQ came and we had that work session. And I'd like to hope that we could have another one sometime this winter. Thank you.
So, Mr. Ayers, would it be within the dimensions of our notice to move to set up such a meeting? What's your thinking there? It's certainly on topic, but
I would set that as a separate agenda item. Focus. Yeah, let's keep this to the letter. That
as a separate item, a separate meeting, absent its notice. Is that your advice? Concerned about public notice.
Yes.
We have dispatched it. As far I don't know.
Oh, okay. So you would need to notice that as a special meeting.
Or put it on a regular agenda.
Or put it on.
Okay. I'm
Mr. Chairman, while Matt was there, don't go back so quick.
There we go.
My question related to this has to do with DEQ's contention about whether or not this is public and this certainly wouldn't be for this meeting, but could you research what is and is not available on public record as far as DEQ's Chapter 23 evaluation and or what basis they have that it might not be publicly available record? And I think that would go a long way to solve some of this issue here.
Well, I mean, if they've made that determination that those are not public records and cannot be accessed by members of the public, that would have been thoroughly vetted by the Attorney General's office. So I would defer to their judgment in that. I suppose if the concern is the concern is that DEQ doesn't want to have this discussion in a public setting or to avoid that.
I would say we don't know.
Okay.
We're hearing conflicting reports. Mr. Himes has told us what his discussion with Mr. Lewis was. I can relate my direct experience in obtaining these records. That's all we know.
The caveat with sort of the Wyoming Public Meeting Act is that if there is no action taking and it is only for the purpose of disseminating information, then that can be held privately.
Well, I guess my question has more to do with those statements that were relayed from Mr. Lewis and some other DEQ staff that those records weren't available. And I didn't see in there that there was any site or anything. And I think that'd go a long way to solving whatever problem we might have as a commission if we knew whether they were available or not.
Okay, yeah, I can certainly look into it, but you know, we do want to avoid a fight with you.
Yeah.
I'm skeptical that it has risen to the Attorney General level, but by all means, let's get that cleared up. Although I would also add that my discussions over the time period, as Commissioner Hanning noted, from Jennifer Ziegler was over here. DEQ, my contacts with DEQ and their public representations, for example, that meeting, have not been in any way stonewalling. They have said anything we can do to help you guys out. So my sense has been that they are willing to cooperate, albeit burdened with massive bureaucratic inertia. So no, I don't suggest that we kick the doors down, but I don't think that is at all necessary. So I would like to proceed on a cooperative basis and love Commissioner Hanning's idea of, as Commissioner Gosar invited them over to talk with us, see if we could set that up. Now, if we need a formal motion that's not within our purview at this meeting to do that, I would like to see that forward. And let's have Mr. Lewis, Ms. Barkow, Mr. Hendon, Jennifer, Todd Parkin, whatever, come over. And again, I was pleased to see the attendance we got completely pro bono from our other colleagues here in the community, Mr. Wetstein and Ms. Carswell. So I think there's an interest in the hydrogeologic consulting community to sit down with DEQ and get to the bottom of this. Much of what we heard from Mr. Himes, you've also heard from me in terms of different answers from different people. And then as I've documented in my review of the paddocks, different answers from the same position, depending on who's sitting in that position. I let the record reflect Mr. Himes nodding his head over here. So I think there's progress to be made short of bringing in the lawyers and public records. Okay, but that's a tractable request of you to determine, or somebody other than us who might be argued to have a dog in this fight to ask DEQ what the access to their records are.
Well, so I suppose my understanding of the request to me is that I simply research whether their kind of internal documents for how they proceed through Chapter 23 reviews is, I suppose, a publicly available document.
Well, and with the start of, if you were to call Ms. Ziegler, for example, and just ask her what their policy is, then we don't have to argue about what the rules are and see what she says. That's all I'm looking for. This is the first step, so that she can have that conversation with a neutral party.
So I would recommend that request comes from a member of the Planning and Zoning Commission. I have found people do not really contact attorneys.
Fair enough. And again, if that's within my, I don't want to step outside my authorization as chair, then we need a formal motion, or can we all just agree to have me talk to Jennifer? Agree to that.
We could, yeah, maybe just a simple motion to direct Chair Hinckley to contact DEQ about their internal process documentation.
Okay, if that, again, that's what I was asking earlier, if that's within the purview of our notice for this meeting, which I didn't think it's.
And Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion that you take this in the end and contact DEQ and find out what's what.
Okay, we were going to proceed with the motion. Is there a second for that?
I'll second it.
Any further discussion of that? All in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
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 I will try to maintain appropriate decorum representing this body.
Yeah, please.
Okay. Okay, Mr. Grimes, if you're welcome to stick around to the rest of our show, but welcome to get on with your life if you so choose. We thank you for your attendance.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, next up, moving into current planning projects, let's just start with a quick update on go ahead, maybe I'll supplement.
So, I don't remember the date, there were a lot of meetings. There was a subcommittee made, at the last joint meeting. And they are reviewing items within the document that need working on. I believe they're supposed to get those done by the end of the month. And then Stantec will make changes from there. Our representatives are Byrne and Mora, so I'll let you guys take it.
Okay, so to just expand on that somewhat, the subcommittee is made up of members from city zoning, what do they call this? Planning commission, planning and zoning from the county, and the environmental advisory committee, which you may recall is a joint appointment between the city and the county. And the idea was to go forward at a sub-forum level, so that we didn't have to get the whole gang of 19 together. We had met once on December 9th. We're due scheduled to meet again tomorrow. And I've been appointed by this little working group to relay our concerns to Stantec, the city and county consultant, and work with David Gertz and Darren Parkin, who are the explicit contract managers. The spirit of the thing is that there are a few remaining issues that we, city and county, would like to see fleshed out in the cap, so that as we move into the regulation development, as we move on into the spring, we have the adequate technical basis for those regulations as we move forward. And this subcommittee have identified 4 or 5 areas. Stantec is so far seems sympathetic to helping develop those a little bit more, just to provide a little more substance behind the regulations. So, if there are any questions on what we're up to, those are certainly welcome. We would expect a new version of the cap, and very likely, and certainly we hope, a final version to be delivered to planning and zoning by the end of January, which would then start our formal review, amendment, 30-day public hearing, send to the county commissioners 45 days. As I worked through all those numbers, it's always kind of shocking, and it's a little startling. Some people haven't run those, but you lay out the calendar, start stacking those 45s on top of those 30s, and the earliest I can see us having a complete new cap and regulations derivative therefrom is probably end of July. So we're all working forward as quickly as we can, and directions to our little group from steering committee were quite clear. Get on it, get it back to planning and zoning to start the formal adoption process. Questions? Okay. Growth area management plan, where are we on that?
All right, so last Friday, staff from both city and county, that was our due date to make changes on the latest draft, I guess, on the plan, the IGA, and the regs. So this week, Logan Simpson is getting all of that incorporated. They're supposed to get it back to us this Friday. And then we'll look it over again. City staff is passing it off to their public works team. And I believe around the end of, or around the beginning of the year, it will go back. We are looking at a mid to late January joint meeting date. We're still not sure on when the date will be, but it's looking like mid to late January. You know about that. So, but we're still chugging along. So,
Joint meeting to do what?
for the growth area management plan, and it's
Just list them? or-
yeah. So they're gonna Logan Simpson will give a presentation on where we are now, and then we'll look to, I believe, have another open house. Don't mark my words. And then move along with the process. Hopefully, maybe.
And the missing piece was the infrastructure plan. I haven't been keeping up. Is that posted somewhere now that hadn't been finished at my last contact?
Nothing has been out in the public yet, but
They were like within a day or two of finishing that.
yeah, we've seen it. It's more on the city public works. That's why it's going back to them. They're the ones that have the major, I guess, concerns with that type of stuff. But
That makes sense. All the infrastructure is the cities.
right.
Other questions, thoughts, comments? Ms. Hennig?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just curious, Joe, are we going to be allowed to review the IGA too? Is that something that will be coming through planning and zoning?
Yeah. So the goal moving forward is to get the plan approved and then work on the other two to get them approved. But I believe all three will be available to look at, because they all are kind of intertwined. But we won't necessarily be focusing on the regulations or the IGA when we're going through this stuff with the plan.
Thank you.
Others? Seeing none, thank you. And yeah, good luck. We haven't seen the end of this, well, long shot. It's going to be a project I suspect will occupy us through the next year, and we'll all learn a lot in the process. Okay, if there are no objections, we'll move on. We rearrange our agenda slightly. Who's going to talk to us about aquifer protection overlay moratorium?
Matt is.
Says with some relief.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, if you could please check your emails, I have sent out a draft resolution. Obviously, we'll need some further input for how to move forward, or if we do want to move forward with this, and kind of the parameters of the moratorium. Currently, the way that this draft is set up is in the existing aquifer protection overlay zone boundary. And any property that is within or partially within, it would be a moratorium on subdivision permit applications and zoning district amendment applications for those properties until the Casper Aquifer Protection Plan updates can be finalized and those regulations accompanying that put in place.
Okay, this was sent out right recently.
This was sent out at about 5:30.
Wait a minute.
I was thinking you just said it.
That's the multitasking. He's back in the past. Okay, questions? And maybe I can start if no one else wants to jump in. So we have this kind of schizophrenia almost. We've got a set of aquifer protection regulations currently out for 30-day review. And so I wasn't clear the latter part of your representation there. Which ones are we talking about? That this moratorium would go until those ones are done, or until these new ones that we're contemplating?
The new ones that are being contemplated with the cap update are being done. That's what this draft is tied to.
And so put a timeline to that, with reference to my earlier representation. So this potentially would be an moratorium through maybe July. You thought through your numbers, and maybe I'm wrong.
We have, so essentially, the general standard for emergency rulemaking under the Wyoming Administrative Procedures Act, which this is different, a moratorium is different. But that rule is 120 days. Counties will do about 150 sometimes, but I think that 120, 4 months is the best number for the time. Now, what you would then do is after approaching that 120 days, if there were a need to extend that, we would just pass a second resolution, the board. And just for way of sort of background legal explanation, these moratoriums are impliedly authorized by the county's zoning authority statutes. With the first case recognizing that, it was Scholler v. Board of County Commissioners. I don't remember the county off the top of my head. That was 1977. The power was reaffirmed in Krauthamel versus Board of Albany County Commissioners in 1997, I believe was the date of that case. And under the case law, counties are allowed to place emergency freezes or temporary moratoriums in order to allow them time to put forth zoning regulations. And that authority can be had without public notice or public hearing. However, the caveat is that once it is put in place by the Board of County Commissioners, they have to then hold a public hearing on the 14th day after its adoption to consider whether this resolution will be put in more permanent terms, which permanent would be that 120 days. And preceding that, there does have to be a recommendation from Planning and Zoning Commission for the adoption of the resolution. So that's just kind of a brief overview of our requirements.
So obviously we are not in a position to approve this tonight, or was that the hope or expectation?
Yes.
We don't really have it in front of us.
Yes, which, I've been back for 48 hours. So crazy in our office with Jennifer, handling both of our responsibilities over the past 2 weeks.
I just stopped you there. Mr. Chairman, I have no idea where this is coming from. Am I totally out to lunch?
Oh, okay, so that's a fair question.
What is the background of this?
Yes.
Who was asking for this?
What's the background?
For background, I suppose that this, in response to this court's ruling in the APOZ amendments appeals, that those were void ab initio. The moratorium.
Just give us the English.
Sorry. So void from their inception. So it means those were never duly in place. And the moratorium It was, I believe, discussed by a few members of the Board of County Commissioners. I'm not sure where they have landed on it. But in order for, I guess, this to be considered by them, it would have to come through, come by a recommendation of the Planning and Zoning Commission first. So I suppose it was kind of a dual response of, you know, us getting those 2021 APOZ regulations out as soon as we could, which was that special meeting. Right. And then this would be an accompanying sort of protective step. And it's certainly open to discussion. Action could be taken on it tonight, but it doesn't have to be. I would definitely recommend that the members of this commission think about sort of the terms of the moratorium, if that is even desired at all. Obviously, there are considerations that go along with the moratorium. It's sort of the nuclear option, especially politically. And I suppose the other caveat is that these need to be as narrow as possible to further the purpose of the moratorium. That is why I suppose we've recommended confining it to subdivision permit applications and zoning district amendment applications.
So I had sent an earlier email. Did you see that this afternoon? Okay, and the question I had asked Mr. Harris was, the concern here would be, let's take the 35-acre minimum lot size, which the county thought it had established last November, and the judge has now told us, no, you didn't. So a window has opened up for applications to come forward for subdivisions at less than 35 acres. So the question I was asking procedurally, as I look at that window, what, and I think we all understand conceptually that if I start my process applying for subdivision under the full rules, then those carry with me. You can't change horses on me in midstream. So the question was, specifically, when does that flag go down? When have you locked into the then existing rules?
When the subdivision permit application is accepted by David and Joe, and deemed complete for their purposes with the accompanying application. So when the application is turned in, and that, you know, as we see through all of our packets, you know, it's the full completion of that entire subdivision application form with the required documents and that accompanying fee.
But to parse that quite finely, you said once that's all submitted, but there's a decision made by planning staff that it is complete. Is that correct?
It is ministerial. It's that checklist. They're not going through chapter 23 and substantively parsing the veracity of statements therein. It's, do you have this? Yes. Do you have this? Yes.
So those dialogues that we typically see between, say, county engineer and the applicant, we're talking about drainage and so forth, that's all downstream of the state.
Yes.
Okay, so theoretically, such an application could show up tomorrow.
Theoretically, yes.
Someone's been working on it.
I mean, obviously, there's a lot of communication between the planning office and applicants before that application is filed. expecting any further applications.
Okay, we'll send that to our staff here, because this is really a crystal ball exercise. If nothing's gonna happen in the next 120 days anyway, then we can spare ourselves the brain cells of the political tortures. Go ahead.
And I'll throw this out there. Planning staff if a moratorium were to come forward and you approve it and whatnot, we would like it to be on subdivisions and zoning district amendments only, and only to new applications. There is only one application that this would apply to. If it were to be, any applications at all, it is the Flutie one. It has been deemed complete. It is ready to go.
So that the moratorium would not apply to the Flutie subdivision.
Okay.
Yeah, because they've already turned it in.
They have tripped that trigger that you were talking about. Okay. Even if they drag out their actual plans.
So also in the subdivision process, we require a pre-application meeting. We have had none within the area. There are none being worked on that we know of. Again, that we know of, as of now, so.
Matt,
Go ahead.
who specifically is asked for this? You said it was a couple people, Board of County Commissioners. Like, where did this actually start from?
I suppose a conversation between my office and Commissioner Ghost.
Okay. I'm just, again, trying to understand what's going on here.
Well, and it's I guess I would offer that it's, once the ruling came down, that the 2021s were
Invalid.
dead on arrival. The county obviously found itself, how do we respond? And do we appeal the church's ruling? Do we do a moratorium? One of those responses was one that we picked up the torch for and said, let's re-advertise the 2021 regs.
All right, that's my thought response.
So that was,
I didn't know it.
that was a big response, one of several possibilities. So that's what we're exploring now, is to backstop that with the terrain. Just thinking through the other things that were done with those 2021 regs. The boundary, which also has been reset. Is there concern there, or is it clear that it couldn't restore the 2021 boundary? There's kind of two levels of issue there, but what are your thoughts on that?
Since this is being tied to the cap update, has a more firm boundary proposed kind of reach for the cap update.
You're asking me?
Mhm.
Yes, yes.
Okay. So it could be that we tie the boundary to the anticipated cap update boundary instead of the existing boundary, which is the 2008 or 2011. I've seen both numbers.
Yeah. So you're saying this moratorium on subdivisions and zoning changes could be tied to the anticipated boundary? And, okay,
Yeah.
which would then capture a bit more of what was lost. Another thing that was changed in the 2021 regs was to tighten the language on expansion of non-conforming uses. What was the thinking there? Why would we want to include that in the moratorium or not? Given that.
Yeah, I would say I don't have the zoning regulations directly in front of me. There is already language for non-conforming uses within the existing zoning resolution.
I have that agree with.
Oh, you have the general provisions.
This is what is.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, as you're looking through those, what we promise you is my memory of it is that what was done in 2021 was to delete a large section of the, what I call 2011s that had special provisions with respect to expansion of the APOC. And what was done in 2021 was to delete those so that expansions revert to the general zoning regulations, which say no expansions.
Well, I mean, it says right here under the general provisions, is the intent of this resolution to permit those nonconformities to continue, provided said nonconformities are not extended, enlarged, or expanded.
Yeah.
Um,
And that was deemed superior to the previous one, which is, you're right down there, that it was kind of curious that the opportunity to expand non-conforming uses was greater in the APOC than it was just across the county in general.
mhm.
So the question would be whether the moratorium should capture that tighter constraint on expansion that was accomplished in 2021.
So they would already, under our existing regulations, need a SSI. If they were to expand it. I do not think that the threat from an expansion under these provisions would really is significant. They would need that SSI. Those don't happen. That's an involved process.
And if I haven't,
Yeah.
I just copied those out for my own thinking if I haven't given you enough to respond. Well, but that was the sense of what was accomplished in November 2021 was to make it more difficult to expand pre-existing use.
Yeah. And then there would also need to be approval by the governor. I do not think that that would be a large threat in the next, what are we at now? 60 some days until those 2021 amendments will be approved.
If they went their full course and there were no substantive changes, it would get you to mid-February. Because our hearing will be January 3, assuming we make no changes, it goes to the county commission, correct me if I'm wrong, they either wait till the next meeting, whatever, start at 45. That gets them down into, say, mid-February, so that's not a huge window. I'm not promoting one view or another, just wondering what the thinking was on that.
We were just really, after our office speaking with David and Joe, those were the biggest threats that we identified, was subdivision and districts. As far as real impacts, I mean, we could absolutely provide a provision. No, actually, that wouldn't really be a moratorium. Yeah, we could provide a provision, or there could be a provision in the moratorium, further the expansion and enlargement. A extension, enlargement, or expansion of any pre-existing non-conforming uses shall not be allowed.
Other commissioners, questions? Ms. Henning, you're nodding your head. You got something to add to this? Go ahead, please.
Hey, thanks, Mr. Chair. Well, I guess I have two questions. One is when, and I don't know if David's not there, if anybody can answer this. Probably Mr. Kennedy can. The previous moratorium that went into place following the withdrawal of the injunction against the Tumbleweed gas station, that there was a moratorium at that time to work on the cap or the APOZ regulations. And there was, I guess those are the regulations that we then moved on to the county commissioners, the 2021 regs that then they changed, and now the court has kicked back. So in my recollection, that's the last time there was a moratorium on activity in the APOZ. And so I guess my question is, was that problematic to citizens? Did we hear a lot of blowback on that, or was that a non-issue?
Was that question directed to me?
Whoever can answer it, but I think, Keith, that you're probably the person who had to spend a lot of time on looking at those potential reg changes under that moratorium.
My recollection is that we had 2 90-day moratoriums prior to the time that we forwarded a set of proposed regulations to the commissioners, and that I want to say that was late in 2019 when we sent those, and then the moratorium, we didn't request to renew a moratorium after we had forwarded those to the commissioners. And that's my best recollection. Somebody can sure correct me if they've dug through all the record on that, but it seems like it was November of 19 when we forwarded the recommended changes to the APOZ to the commissioners. And I guess my question at this point is more for Matt. When could the commissioners act on this if it was final, once it's finalized? So the commissioners would have to act on this, and that would be at their December 20th meeting, because they could add that to their agenda that's already up for that meeting.
Yeah, well, it could be as soon as immediately following this meeting, or whenever a determination of a recommendation is made. That initial adoption by the board does not require notice or hearing.
It's just the 14 days after.
Correct.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, if I could just also add an aside about my personal experience in another state and community with a moratorium on building. In 2001, during a severe drought in New Mexico, the city of Santa Fe decided to place a moratorium on building to allow the state and also the city to develop regulations on like wastewater reuse, gray water use, and it was put in place to prevent people from suddenly rushing to get development in place when everybody understood there was a water shortage issue that needed to be addressed. And the last thing that would have helped would be for everybody rushing in to try to get their development proposals in. And so I happened to be sitting in a City of Santa Fe meeting to present on what the state was doing about wastewater reuse at our end on trying to solve the problem. And I was struck by a presentation by a consultant that presented, the economic downside to the city for economic growth during that period of the moratorium. And basically what the consultant presented was that there would continue to be economic growth There were projects already in the pipeline that developers were going to be moving along on, and it wasn't going to bring a complete halt to economic generation of income in the community. The difference was that so basically it still provided a growth line like this. The difference was that if you hadn't had the moratorium, you'd have the same slope line higher up with people making more money. But it didn't kill economic development and growth. And so I was left with the impression that it was a decent trade-off in that situation, and wasn't going to be extremely detrimental to the community. And so I guess I feel in this case, it's probably fairly similar, that there are things already in the pipeline, developments that haven't been built but have been approved in the APOZ. This isn't hampering development in other parts of the county, that this would have a short-term impact, but probably not a terribly bad one for the economy of our county. And so I guess with that previous experience and watching the previous moratorium here, following that tumbleweed injunction withdrawal, I guess I think this is a good idea to move ahead on a moratorium freeze. It sounds like it's tried to be narrowly focused on the biggest potential threats, and it gives us the ability to resolve some of these sticky issues without anybody rushing in, trying to get an application in to preempt some of the reg changes that we're trying to effect. Thanks.
Let me add just briefly to Commissioner Kennedy's memory. What happened there was a sparring between the county commission and the planning and zoning at that time over this issue of can the county commission do a moratorium without having had planning and zoning approve it? And that went back and forth. You'll recall, Mr. Kennedy, the commission you were on, I was not, requested staff to provide a set of exceptions to the moratorium. So it went forward from planning and zoning for adoption with a very extensive list of exceptions. Many of us on the outside felt that it was a moratorium for which all possible teeth had been completely removed. So I don't really think that moratorium did anything, nor was it intended to do anything. Whether it would have made any difference had the teeth not been removed, I'm not speculating. Other thoughts on the proposition before us? I'm a little reluctant to approve anything I haven't seen. Is it short enough that you can show it to us and we can read it on the spot? I'm reluctant to vote for something only by its narrative description. I don't know how others feel about it. I mean, I'm going to do a motion as always.
So it's 4 pages or 3 pages.
What's the pleasure? Do you guys want to look at this thing, or you want to defer it, or special meeting, or do it in January?
Well, Mr. Chair, first of all, yeah, it's a little sudden. I don't believe I have an informed vote to make at this moment in time, and I'm not sure exactly why we're voting, because doesn't this proceed? This is the county commissioner, right? They're putting forward that they want to have a moratorium. They have to have a public hearing on it. How do we exactly fit in?
I can answer that a little bit.
Thank you.
It has to come from Planning and Zoning Commission. Otherwise, it would be the same as the APOZ that was overturned by the court. So it has to come through us first. And I guess my inclination, Jeffrey, is somewhat like yours, that there's already a special meeting notice for January 3rd. And I think everybody would be well served to at least take the time to go through this in some detail. We've already heard from Joe as to what's in the pipeline. And I don't see much chance of people getting carried away in the next 2 weeks over the holidays with applications into planning and zoning, but that's just my supposition.
Thank you, Commissioner. I share your, well, first surprised. I'm with Commissioner Flack, like, what happened? Because I thought we kind of moved on this, and I would like to see what we've started play out before, and I'm very conscious of the nuclear option here with the moratorium, that it seems a little premature, but maybe Commissioner Gosar knows something we don't.
We are purely recommending, one option would be say, sure, do what you want. That seems a little vague. But I think Mr. Kennedy put it correctly, the process requires them, the county commission, to have us say go for it. I don't say that advocating for or against it. They can't do anything without us saying so. That's my understanding.
Yeah, especially for a moratorium. That was the Krauthamel, I'm not completely sure. That case in Albany County, the moratorium recommendation came from planning staff and not planning and zoning commission, so that was dead on arrival.
Gotcha. Okay. So since we, planning and zoning, echoing Commissioner Kennedy, is going to take the heat for this, I think we need to take a little time to figure out, A, do we want to do this, recommend that the commissioners do this, and what's the timing? And tonight's probably not the time to incorporate a thoughtful discussion.
Yeah, and also determine exactly what the terms of the moratorium need to be.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, we've heard from a couple of commissioners that you just assume wait on this. We don't need to take action. And to be fair to the process, we were talking about this like the county commissioners have asked this. They have not met. They have not made any decisions. Is that correct? There's no.
It's my understanding now.
Formal direction to us.
Okay.
They could have showed up in our meeting and lobbied us if they wanted to. All right, so Mr. Platt, what's your thinking?
I've got two thoughts. I mean, given that folks would rather take some time and take a true look at this, I'm fine with that. I also think this doesn't really probably matter. I mean, I think it's very unlikely what's going to happen in the next 120 days either way. So if the county commissioner wants to go ahead and do this right now, I have no objection. I mean, I've looked it over. You know, for subdivisions and zoning changes, not much is going to happen. So I'm fine either way.
Mr. Chairman, in light of that, I would move to table this until the January 3rd meeting.
Well, so the January 3rd is a special meeting. So if we wanted to consider it at that meeting, we would need to amend the agenda and the notice for that meeting.
And Mr. Chairman, I believe the time's sufficient to do that. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I think that's correct. Yeah, and we would have to take that step. Is there a second for Mr. Kennedy's motion? A second. Okay. Further discussion? I'm with Commissioner Platt. I could go either way. I don't think it'll make much difference. What's before us would be, is there some exposure that we want to close over the next 2 weeks, 3 weeks? Other thoughts, or should we put to a vote?
Mr. Chair, I guess I'd be ready to vote on this now personally, just because looking at it, the majority of the first page whereases really just recitations of why we think the cap is important. It's sort of a recitation of everything I think we could all easily agree to, you know, like the delineation of the APOZ, why it's important, what the history is of previous regulation updates, what the history is of the court bouncing it back. I mean, it's really nothing on that whole first page probably for us to really have much comment on, because it's a recitation of factual information. And it's really just the last page where it says, you know, what's going to happen because of it. The now therefore, it's the now therefore after that that the rubber hits the road, and it really is narrow to just subdivision permit applications and or zoning district amendment applications. I think it's a pretty straightforward document, really. And I understand people want more time to look at it, but I think if you break it into those sections, you would see that the first part, there's probably not much to argue about, because it is a factual recitation of things. So maybe I'm just a paranoid person who likes to close gaps. But that's why I'd be happy to move forward on it right now. But I'm also, if the predominant wisdom is let's table it for January 3rd, I'm fine with that too. I can tell my paranoia to go think of something else for a while. Thanks.
All right, I'm just looking at over his flat shoulders. I try to agree. I think at a minimum, we need to be clear on what we're voting up or down on. So with your indulgence, let me read those few sentences into the record. And it's now therefore the Board of County Commissioners, Albany County, Wyoming, resolved. Section 1, that the foregoing recitals are incorporated in and made part of this emergency resolution by reference. Section 2, the Board of County Commissioners of Albany County hereby declare that a temporary freeze moratorium up to 120 days should be placed on any subdivision permit applications and or zoning district amendment applications regarding properties situated in whole or in part within the Aquifer Protection Overlay Zone and located in the unincorporated area of Albany County. And it goes on to talk about setting the hearing. Okay. So the motion on the floor is to put it off till January 3rd. If you want to pass moratorium, you would vote no on this motion, and then we would proceed to an alternative motion. If you like the idea of scheduling this for additional consideration on January 3rd, then you would vote in the affirmative. Other discussion, lobbying. Okay, motion on the floor is to take this up, to defer action today, to take it up in our special meeting January 3rd. Mr. Kennedy.
Aye.
Ms. Hanning. We can come back around if you want to.
You're muted.
There we go.
How about you come back to me at the end so I can see what the popular wisdom is?
Okay. Mr. Tyne.
Aye.
Hinckley, I vote no. Which brings us to a tie, if I'm listening correctly. Ms. Hanning, it's up to you.
Oh, who else voted no?
I did.
I'll vote no.
Okay, now, so just let's make sure I got it right. I got it. And I vote from Kennedy and Tyne, and a no vote from Hanning, Platt, and I vote no as well. Motion fails. Is there an alternative motion someone would like to propose?
Mr. Chairman, I move that we recommend it's laid out here.
The motion of sufficient definition. lay down here, might be the thing.
Yeah, I would say, motion to recommend, to the, Board of County Commissioners, the, moratorium as presented, by the Albany County Attorney's Office
At this meeting.
at this meeting.
Okay, yeah, is that compatible with what your motion is? I think the record then will be clear. And voting on, everybody clear up voting on?
I'll second.
And I need a second. Go ahead.
Sorry. Joe pointed this out, and I think it would be appropriate under section 2 on the last page. I'm gonna add the word new so that it would read that the Board of County Commissioners of Albany County hereby declare that a temporary freeze/moratorium for up to 120 days should be placed on any new subdivision permit applications. Because the ones that are already in the works are, they're beyond this.
Is that acceptable to the board? And we're looking for a second. Ms. Hanning, acceptable?
Yes, I'll second the amendment.
We have a properly framed motion and second. Further discussion. Mr. Kennedy.
I was just going through dates and just so anybody's aware, that would mean it would, if the commissioners act next on the 20th, that would then void about April 13th, give or take, and need to be renewed. And that was part of my motion to table because that would put it off until early in May. So were you calling for a vote, Mr. Chairman?
Was, although it's open to discussion until somebody moves.
Okay.
So, I'm sorry, was that a vote?
I didn't know whether you'd called for a vote.
I had, but I'm willing to not have it be a call for a vote for further
Okay.
discussion. I don't want to preclude any debate, so what's your pleasure? Like to debate this further?
Hearing no other, I'll vote no.
Ms. Hannon?
Aye.
Platt? Aye. Time?
No,
Hinkley votes aye, and that motion carries. So this will go forward to the county commission for disposition as they think best with our recommendation. And slight amendment. And with a slight amendment. All right, fair enough. Thank you. Oh, now we're at 7:20. I don't think we're going to get through the bylaws. My thought was that we would chip away at them. Where are folks? Have folks taken the time to go through the bylaws as distributed, and would we like to queue those up for some discussion? What's your pleasure?
I'm happy to do that if we have a small break.
Okay. Okay. What say those online? You want to take a small break and dive into bylaws?
Small break, maybe back at 7:25.
Sure.
works for me.
In recess till 7:25. Okay, hear you, we're back in session. Are we all? Yes, we are. Okay, so we're moving on to item bylaws, rules of procedure. So with the absence of Mr. Courage, either Mr. Kennedy or Mr. Phillips can tell us where are we? What did you put in our packet? What are we looking at?
So these bylaws are bylaws that Matt has been working on, and
No, yeah, they,
and that's what's in the packet. It's just revised from Matt.
Okay, and Commissioner Kennedy, you had brought this to our attention sometime back. To what extent are your fingerprints on this thing?
Mine were very easy word substitutions, and I've gone through and Matt has some comments in along as well as highlights, and I don't believe I left those in, but I'm thinking that if we just go through this page by page, see how far we get, and then we can go on from there. With primarily the highlighted and where Matt has comments inserted would be where I'd start.
Okay, that's congruent with what I had thought. I just read through them and made notes myself. I'm thinking like our subdivision regs, I don't aspire to having something finished at this meeting, but rather to provide feedback to staff, and then we'll continue to chip away at it. Is that?
oh, and may I?
Yes, please.
Okay, yeah, and I had begun going through these at the request of Mr. Kennedy from a few meetings back. And when I really kind of started digging into it, because this template or this version is from Carbon County, their Planning and Zoning Commission. And particularly with some of those definitions, it just doesn't really fit the way that I see us as doing things. So it was gonna like a lot of those highlights and definitions are pretty much areas where I saw that there would need to be some pretty like substantive rewriting. So I stopped short of those rewrites because to a certain extent, I thought it might be easier to just revamp our bylaws as they exist, kind of update those statutory citations.
I guess I'm not quite following it. Instead of doing this, you think we should go back to our 78s and modify it? I mean, I don't know what the easiest path to the end.
I thought that might be an easier path, as in terms of needing to put in new language, write new provisions, because I will commend Carbon County if they do follow these to a T, because it is pretty lofty procedure. So my apologies, Mr. Kennedy. Perhaps I should have conveyed that earlier to you.
Well, all right, since this is what's in front of us, I guess enough others have read through it and just want to provide some general direction. That sounds productive to me. We're not, if someone wants to make a formal amendment, they're certainly welcome to, but maybe if there are things, general parts of this that you like or don't like that would help us move forward, does that work?
So are we going to be working off our rules, regulations, or working off this as a draft?
We just work up this because it's what's in front of us. I don't have a copy of the old, I didn't mark them up. Again, for the rest of you, where were you suggesting that?
No, I think it's fine to go through these. There are just, there are certain things where it's like the Carbon County, they will pass a resolution for every action of planning and zoning. Typed out resolution like the moratorium. That is not required under state statute, and I do not have the time to type out a resolution for every single action of this commission.
But I could get there with this document by just striking those,
Yeah, you can.
which is where I was going.
Okay, yeah, so. Yeah, I'd say let's look at this then.
All right, I'm just looking for a platform to work. All right, I'm looking at my 3 smiling faces on the screen. Are you guys prepared? Let's just start with page 1 and kind of see what happens. I understand from Commissioner Gomes, Mr. Ayers, that let's not be wordsmithing. That will come in another pass, but concepts as we go through. Give it a half hour here, say. Okay, so everybody, I'm on something called page 4, which is chapter 1. I printed it, but I think it's the same as what you'll see on screens. General provisions. General provisions. So let's see how this goes. Thoughts on that page, anybody?
I think in C, you, pardon me, you could put regulation rather than resolution.
Except that formally we do resolutions, right?
Yeah, the document title is the Albany County zoning resolution.
Okay,
And then and then it's also the Albany County plating and subdivision resolution. So that would, yeah.
okay. So you could just put plating and subdivision resolution in C then.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I did a thought on that. Does that include, because like down here in G, they talked about all the individual things and say wind, solar, towers, are those all part of the zoning resolution, I guess?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's called the Albany County Planning Subdivision Regulations.
It's actually a resolution. I changed it. Because so the title page says one thing, and then in the first section, it says these regulations shall be referred to as the Albany County plating and zoning regulation. Or sorry, resolution. Resolution.
All right, some of that we can let you guys work out the niceties of. So to pick on that same thought, so when I get down to G, I just thought if I listed all those, is that clear that that covers everything? In item G, I mean, just say the definition for items for consideration or item means, and then there's a list. Whenever I see a list, I want somebody left out, or is it covered everything? Maybe that's good. Okay, maybe just, again, we can flag these for further consideration, but that's what caught my attention. Other
Should it-
thoughts?
Sorry, Mr. Chair, just the definitions refer to the comprehensive plan. And I'm wondering if we should have a definition also then for the Casper Aquifer Protection Plan and whether those should be listed in G generally as land use plans.
I would resist that temptation because both the aquifer protection is an overlay on zoning, as would be any future growth plan that's adopted, as long as it's incorporated into the zoning resolution, and that zoning or the plating and subdivision resolution, because that mentioning the planning documents isn't conducive to complying with state statute, where it can be considered, but it can't be definitive as to, in other words, anything you want to have govern action has to be in the zoning or subdivision and plating resolutions. So I tend to leave that out, but that's my preference.
And where does that even show up later on? I mean, why are we defining comprehensive plan? Anyway,
I don't, well, so a few of these I added in. I think comprehensive plan was one that Carbon County already had in there. So I just swapped out Carbon County for Albany County. And sorry to back up, but briefly under C, the reason I didn't list that out is because the zoning resolution and subdivision resolution, those are the abbreviated kind of terms. Under subdivision resolution means the Albany County Planning and Zoning subdivision, and zoning resolution means the Albany County zoning resolution. I don't think we need to add any language there in C. And then I do not.
maybe the general comment there is let's just do a sweep of these, and if they're not relevant to the document, which I think is what Commissioner Kennedy's saying, they don't need to be.
Yeah, so the comprehensive plan only comes up in that definition.
All right,
So,
that's easy.
yeah.
Just like defining things.
Yeah. So I have deleted that.
Okay, that's easy. J, same thing, resolution isn't formal, it's a regulation of all the county or something, right? A formal expression of opinions means is that.
So that was in there from Carbon County because, you know, they do attach a formal resolution to all of their recommendations and actions.
Okay, so maybe we can do without that.
Yeah. Because I tried to provide a better definition for certification of a recommended action where it's a majority vote of the planning and zoning commission, which may be accompanied by a resolution certifying a recommended action to the board pursuant to Wyostat and 18.5. Yeah. And I think there will be certain things, like if we ever get another commercial wind energy conversion system application, my office will be insisting on formal resolutions for anything that's a large project like that.
Subdivision control, L, let me know what that is.
I don't know what that, yeah, that was a pre-existing one.
So maybe that is gonna fall out when you do the sweep.
Yeah.
The only other thought I had on this page was this business at F, vice chair or senior member, and fine to say, or anybody else they designate. Don't need to worry about seniority.
Yeah, that was how they had it defined. So I don't, so yeah.
Well, and to that point, I won't be on the commission on January 3rd. So there won't be a vice chairman. So if Vern can't chair the meeting, if it were worded like this, Mara would be the chair.
And Maura would rather not be the chair. She would be nominating Mr. Platt or Mr. Tyne for that role. I do not consider myself a good person at keeping meetings on track, so I'm saving you all from myself.
We would appoint somebody on the spot if you don't train us to senior member. And then the packet is something that I thought might require definition, because I'm thinking down somewhere I'd like to see these bylaws corral this whole, what's the notice, what do we share with everybody, and what has to be shared before it comes to the meeting. I think there's a little ambiguity there that these might usefully clear up. So again, for your consideration, might we find this thing?
Yeah.
That we distributed.
I hadn't thought about that. I can't define it off the top of my head right now.
No, this is a good one to think about.
And is there a better work meeting packet?
Yeah, what do we call it? The packet, is it got any? The packet? Is there any statutory term that, no?
Application and comments would be the other way to word that.
Well, I mean, the packet would also include, you know, like if David does like a typed update on something
Mhm.
or a memo or memorandums.
Yeah, I just think that, and I'm going back to the public notice, and the whole spirit of it is to let the public know what it is we're gonna be talking about. And so we typically have a packet, and in this electronic age, the county commission goes way overboard. I mean, they throw everything in the packet, from the newspaper to some solicitation to give money to X, Y, Z, but we don't, it isn't everything that ever came into the planning office, but the draft ideas, I think are appropriate, and I wouldn't mind having the bylaws obligate us to providing that information.
So I think I tried to encompass the packet in terms of staff report, a memorandum prepared by the planning director as designated pertaining to an item or item for, or pertaining to an application or item for consideration. And then the packet is really just a compilation of staff reports. To an extent, I mean, because you're always going to have some sort of memorandum proceeding.
Are you gonna use the packet anywhere else at the, well, then I'm thinking we will, but I haven't got a place for it. So, right, maybe that's a placeholder. And
This thing I'm looking at is actually a little tab says agenda packet.
agenda packet, okay, so, because the agenda is another piece that I don't have wording to suggest, but I think we could work that section as well. All right, let's move on to page 5, general concepts, things you'd like our staff to work on.
I think you could easily delete that part that Matt highlighted at the bottom. Section 6, item C. The minutes do that, so why should that be repeated?
Yeah, it seemed like an onerous requirement.
I agree.
Plan.
I agree, Mr. Kennedy. Anybody else?
But staff makes you unhappy, we can always put it back in.
Right.
That's great too.
What was up above that, section 3, it talks, officers shall serve until their successors are duly elected and qualified. I think what and qualified means. All right,
So I didn't really change too much of their language.
if that has no meaning, let's strike it.
Okay. Sorry, where is it?
It's section 3, answer chapter 2, second sentence.
Actually, I have some experience with the AG on that. And let's say that the commissioners don't appoint new members. And we actually got an opinion from the AG that members serve until they or their replacement are appointed. So if for some reason, let's say the commissioners wouldn't act to replace someone on the commission, it wouldn't place you in a position where you were unable to have a quorum without everyone there. And I tend to think maybe it might be a good thing to just leave that in, just because you never know what might happen or what sort of impediments there might be to a meeting or interviews later on.
But doesn't this say, this is talking about the officers, not the members. Officers shall serve until their successors are duly elected.
Yeah, and maybe you want to add some language in there too.
I guess I'm not clear on the scenario that you're painting. This would say that.
Let's say there was something like a COVID emergency and it was difficult at best for the commissioners to meet and appoint or replace a member. that they would serve until their successor is appointed.
This is just talking about the officers of the commission, not members of the commission.
That's true, but I would tend to include members as well. And Matt may want to research that some more, but that was an opinion that we got on governor appointed individuals until a successor was appointed, even though their term had expired. They would serve until there was a successor or a reappointment was made.
If you're thinking it was some additional language under section 2, sounds like where that was appropriate.
Yeah, that it might fit better in section 2.
All right, well, let's get our ace legal scholar here to think about that. We don't want to be left in the lurch. Right. Other thoughts here?
Mr. Chair, are there terms of office in here right now? Our current bylaws talk about terms of office and sort of a vehicle for removing a member if the county commissioners have just cause that, other than politics or religion, and after public hearing by the Board of Commissioners. So just our current bylaws allow for the removal and set terms.
And that's a quote from state statute that I've actually read before. So
To your first point, it says we're going to elect officers every year. So the implication is 1-year terms in section.
yeah,
I must be mixing up the membership terms of office as opposed to the officers.
Yeah, 2 separate things.
Yeah.
And the membership terms, as Commissioner Kennedy suggested, are more state statute. We have to have 5, and I think it says 3-year terms inside the county and, well, inside the city and outside. So what's missing here, it sounds like, is you'd like some removal criteria. But we can't, that's not part of our bylaws. Or can we throw one of ourselves out? I guess.
no.
Oh, no, yeah.
Please, can I do that? I'll go.
Maybe volunteers.
For everybody's good.
There, Mr. Ayers.
Yeah, no.
Okay, so we can't do that. The commissioners can.
Correct.
In item 4, I would strike the secretary or in the last line, planning director or their designee shall attend meetings. Yeah, I don't know who this secretary person even is. See where I am. And I'm down under A on the minutes. An original copy of such minutes, I would add upon receiving final approval by planning and zoning. Just to distinguish it from the minutes that are distributed. And then I don't know that we need to attest it by the chair. We formally adopt them in a meeting anyway.
Mr. Chair, I just also have a question maybe for Mr. Ayers. In terms of records and reports, now that these meetings are recorded and posted on YouTube, is that something that we should be acknowledging that we're doing and saying that we're committing to doing from here on out?
If you're fine with committing yourself to that for each and every one, there is no requirement for the recordation by video. really the only requirement is the minutes. So, you know, I would say maybe it's not great to shoehorn yourself into that in case of technical issues or, something of that nature where it might not be possible.
So we just keep it as a complementary feature that we provide right now, but I see your point that if there were technical difficulties and it weren't possible to record, you wouldn't want the whole meeting to be for naught.
Oh, I have a question for the staff. If I want to look at the minutes of the March meeting, where do I find those?
Website.
You go to the website, you go to
The April meeting.
What's that? That's what I'm doing.
Agendas and minutes.
You go to how do I, and then find agendas and minutes, and then there's a whole list.
Okay, and the minutes I find there will be the ones that get amended.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. That's a better answer than Mr. Blatt's.
Yes,
That's been my answer. I got to figure out now. Okay, thank you. I've got nothing more on page 5. Other thoughts folks want to throw into the discussion? Page 5.
I don't love what I came up with for reports. But that goes back to our packet conversation. I would need to think about that a little more.
Yeah, okay. So the staff report, and there's auxiliary materials sometime, and just, what is that? And I'm thinking about those things that aren't a formal application, they're a discussion items.
Yeah, so maybe meeting materials.
All right. Well, you have to turn to page 6. Yeah, and here I don't have language to provide, but what we've been doing this year is that the chair and the planning director have been cooperating on the agenda. And it can be more than just a ministerial thing. I mean, the order and what things come up and what gets deferred to another meeting. I think it's fair to assign that kind of referee work to somebody. Typically it's the chair.
Yeah, I suppose so in our conversation with about all of this 185202 business, and requiring a recommendation from the board, let's say if there was a hostile PZC board composition and the board or the planning and zoning was stonewalling, the workaround that my office came up with is that we would take that power out of the chair's hand to control an agenda item and force that agenda item on a planning and zoning's consideration.
But that's a privilege you would extend.
What's that?
You would extend that privilege to the board
Yeah,
alone.
well, yes,
It is
but
not an invitation we extend to the board large.
no, but it would be through the planning director running that agenda item.
So we could write language that said the board can put whatever they darn well please on the agenda.
Well, it would be David putting the agenda, not the board. I mean, they would direct David to put it on. The action would be David.
Under threat of firing.
Yeah.
Okay, whatever I'm sympathetic to that, but I do like the idea of on a routine basis, there being some interplay between the commission and the director.
Okay, planning director, and.
So let's play with that language.
Okay.
And then just the way this is written, it doesn't distinguish the draft agenda, it's just a draft. So the actual agenda is the agenda until the commission approves it. Is that correct legally?
Where do you see this?
Well, I'm just saying that this refers to the agenda as though it's it's the draft agenda. It's always the draft agenda.
Yeah.
Until a council board meeting. So I'm just inserting the word draft in these, or does the agenda come from?
Yeah, I mean, that might be splitting hairs, because yeah, it's kind of a living document. I mean,
But isn't it correct that it doesn't become our agenda until we approve it? Otherwise, we maybe have the first step in our meeting.
yeah, to add. Yeah, okay, I see what you're saying. No, I mean, it was still the agenda before. I guess that's just an amended agenda.
Yeah, well, whatever that is, and it speaks to our earlier point of the agenda is what invites people to the meeting, so we can't add something at the last minute, I assume, or we have violation of our public notice requirements. But we can delete things, I assume, otherwise.
I think, doesn't section D speak to that?
Please, go ahead.
Doesn't section D speak to that? Subjects that are not listed on the official agenda, so it's an official agenda. Maybe you consider it a meeting only with consent of the PCC and after amendment of the agenda.
Yeah, and I'd add on to that at a regular meeting, you can add items onto the agenda. Special meetings are a different matter. It's only what's listed. You could only delete items on a special agenda.
But is that correct? On a regular meeting, we can add agenda items on the spot?
Yeah, it is.
Then what are our notice requirements? That seems to defeat the point.
Well, so those are notice requirements for public hearings. So you couldn't add a public hearing onto an agenda item, but like for, scheduling a meeting in the future, you can always add in that as an agenda item. So yeah, because there's a difference between the public hearing, which is required for applications, and then just agenda items in general. So for non-public hearing agenda items, you can add those on the fly if it's a regular meeting. If it's a special meeting, you are confined to what has been noticed on the agenda for that special meeting.
Okay, I did not understand that. But if that's something that needs to be spelled out here, that'd be helpful.
Well, I mean, statute spells it out to some extent. I mean, the Public Meetings Act, for how short it is a very loaded thing.
Say that again.
It's just, there's not many words in it, but it is like a very complicated act.
All right, then maybe that's the T there, subjects not may be considered. Okay, I guess that's what we were just saying. Whether they're distributed to public notice or not. Okay.
And Mr. Chairman, differentiate between public hearing and public comment too.
Yes.
You really need to bear that difference in mind.
And that was another just large body that I thought we ought to try to get our mind around at some point is public comment. When are we obligating ourselves to take public comment? When aren't we? In a public hearing, obviously we are. But I guess I throw that out to the rest of you. I wouldn't object to our bylaws obligating us to some level of public comment. It's a dicey area.
Well, it's something that's been very customary at the end of the meeting to have public comment on non-agenda items. So that if there's an issue the public has that we think should be considered at another meeting, it's brought to our attention.
And I think it's fine to obligate ourselves to do that rather than
Yeah.
just having it custom. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's think about where that might fit.
Yeah, and I just, as a general statement, I am happy to, I guess, fix that reports issue because I kind of created that issue. But I would appreciate that for what you want to see, if you could bring forth those changes yourself, so that I am more in a reviewing capacity, since I do not have the time and resources to be legislative services.
What says Mr. Rose? You know? Yep. Thanks. All right, well, we're working together on this, but fair enough. I mean, if I want to propose something, let me try some words, and then we can all kick them around.
Yeah, and I'm always happy to help with that. Yeah, I cannot be a bill drafter.
Yeah, I think
Oh, it's fun.
Yeah, well, but that's all that they do.
use salary control as part of the deal.
Yeah, that sounds great. I would have to talk to the commissioners, but
Okay, well, we'll look to you to keep us on track in terms of not getting outside statute notices. And
certainly,
that's
yeah.
key. All right, those are my random thoughts on that. Page 6, others things you'd like to see that just like your attention, something we all want to think about. And of course, the rule here is if you want to suggest something, then you automatically become the drafting nominee. Turning to page 7.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I'm late on the uptake. I don't know where this goes. I just noticed that in our existing bylaws, we refer to conditions and recommendations. Like, you know, we make recommendations that have conditions attached, and right now I'm not running into in this carbon county attempt where we have the right to condition our recommendation. And I don't know if that goes into that section 7 on page 6 about notice of recommended action, or whether it belongs elsewhere. But I see that as a potential gap right now, that we're not including our right to condition and approval.
Sounds like a volunteer.
Well, and let's put the time frame in this. I think we're amending the ones that were done in 1974 or something. So yeah, it's another couple of years. Page 11. Okay, page 11. Rose is directing us to. Yeah, they start at 18. So that's where we would talk about the character of our recommendations.
Yeah.
I had a general question on the whole thing, and maybe that's for you, Mr. Harris. This seemed a small area of public hearings. It was all very trial based, finders of fact and evidence. We just get rid of all that. That struck me as not by no means what we've ever done.
Yeah, no, I mean, they're setting it up almost like a contested case, which we want to avoid. Yeah, we can. I mean, it might be good just to leave a little bit that, you know, the presiding, the chair will open the public hearing. then we go to the applicant. And questions are asked of the applicant. Well, actually, then it goes to public hearing is opened, planning staff presents the staff report of the application. The applicant is asked questions by the Planning and Zoning Commission, and then public comment is taken on the application.
Right, which I think is top of page 7, is kind of,
Yeah.
it's just laid out, not exactly like you said it, but perhaps we could get you to give us a quick trim on what's appropriate of all of this stuff to what we actually do and what you have to do.
Yeah.
But I would rearrange that section 2 on page 7 to just describe what happens. It is quite right now, but sure can be made right.
Oh, that's section 2. Well, that's the general order of business for the whole meeting. And then that opening of public hearings.
Okay, or maybe we break out of public hearings, proceedings,
Yeah.
Okay, but Ms. Hanning, what we kind of taken a riff on your last comment. Where are we?
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. Sometimes I'm having trouble hearing the conversation in the room there.
I think you were the last person to make a comment, and then we kind of riffed off in another direction. So I just wanted to get back to you on the concern that you expressed a moment ago.
Well, I guess in general, I think it's going to take some effort to match up our current bylaws with amending the Carbon County ones to make sure that there isn't anything that's dropped out by mistake. You know, like, for example, the explicit ability for us to condition a recommendation. Or if I go rogue, the ability for the county commissioners to take me off of the Planning and Zoning Commission. So just although I looked at the material in our packet today, I didn't take the time to compare it to our existing bylaws to see if there's any gaps. And I'm kind of doing that on the fly. And that's why I'm not very organized in coming up with solutions. I'm willing to work on this more to try to figure out if there's a good way to meld it, because we know Matt, he's got to get ready to go back before the state Supreme Court soon, I think. And he doesn't want to mess with this.
That may be stayed, actually, based off of the direct suit.
Oh, lucky you.
Yeah, we still have other litigation.
You're plenty busy anyway.
Yeah.
I guess my vision is, it sounds like it's congruent with this meeting, is that we're going to chip away at this, and we'll give it a lick every meeting until we get something that we're happy with. And anybody who has specific language, when you get a spare minute, throw it to these guys, and they can bring it into our next packet.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And maybe because I'm looking through my markup, we've covered most of the things I was concerned about, and they need work. And I would like, unless somebody suggests otherwise, I would like to offer some language. I haven't thought of yet on those agenda stuff and public comment. I just think it'd be a good place for them to have in our files. Other thoughts? Mr. Time, anything you want to throw in at this point?
Sorry, I had to unmute myself. No, not at this time.
now that even our newest members have at least a year under their belt, think about how these would apply to what we do, and let's, as we can, move forward. Okay. Other thoughts on that? Should we move on? I'm not hearing your groundswell. Last eyelids are becoming heavy, are they?
Yes,
Okay. Well, that brings us to this general category of other items and announcements. I just a question there. We have our subdivision regs out for review. Get any comments? Okay, and then same question on the zoning amendments. They're done now. Did this county get, does anybody know? To get comments?
Oh,
On the zoning.
did those get comments?
No, not that I know.
Okay.
But our APOD regulation amendments will be getting public comment.
Oh, yeah, because those are now out for 30 days as well.
Yeah, and we did receive a request from Nicholas and Tangent for direct written notice.
What did that mean?
So it is under the Wyoming Administrative Procedure Act, the Wyoming Public Meetings Act, that you have to provide notice to anyone who requests it, and that can be kind of blanket, a little more specific. But once that request is made, it's valid for a year. It's then part of your notice requirements.
So it's kind of like put us on your mailing list.
Yeah.
Okay, I saw that go by and didn't know what that meant.
Yeah.
Okay, other just general questions for these guys. I just want to get us up to speed. All right, I had a more general comment, which is I'd like to take the opportunity to acknowledge Commissioner Kennedy for his years of service to the Planning and Zoning Commission. I've had the opportunity to work with Mr. Kennedy on and off over much of his 2 terms, both from the perspective of a member of the public and these last 2 years as a colleague on the commission. And I can attest to his consistently thoughtful and knowledgeable contributions. Even when we've not agreed on a particular policy direction, Mr. Kennedy has provided careful evaluation of the matter at hand, well-reasoned arguments, respect for his fellow commissioners and the public, and relevant context for our deliberations. So, Keith, you'll be missed, and you're always welcome to come share with us your valuable perspectives and advice. Thank you.
Thanks so much. I think in January and February, I'll enjoy harassing LSO rather than you. So I've enjoyed my time on the commission and wish you all the best. Thank you.
Certainly made a contribution. Anybody else want to comment on anything?
Well, I was actually going to say the same. You'll be best, Keith. I don't know how to replace you. It's certainly I'm not the one.
I'm going to echo that. And I know that I've had the shortest time, but it's been enlightening. And you're a bit of a role model.
Thanks.
I'd also like to chime in and I agree with everything everybody said. And I guess one thing I passed along to the county commissioners during my interview was I really feel that you've brought an important balance to the commission and a great insight. And I really feel like it'll be a loss not to have your balance among our group. So you will be missed, and we hope you come back and harass us.
Thanks, Mara.
Okay, anybody else?
Other comments?
Other comments? This is open.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd like to say something about the HAL application.
Okay, fair.
I think it's worth trying to step back from a moment and just trying to think about how that all was handled, and what I have learned in terms of, that's actually what I want to ask you about. If you had any feedback from us. And the one, I'll say one thing, but something that's present in my mind is that from my point of view, a lot of discussion back and forth was quite technical, which is fine. And I think that's probably what outside members of the public would think, were they viewing it. And while water quality is extremely important, we are charged with some other things too. Promoting moral to the county and governance is also right up front. And it's very important that our action, I mean, we all agree on this, but say that what we decide at technical must be counterbalanced by our need to remind ourselves we have to govern in a way that's perceived as being impartial and fair by people who don't understand technical matters. It might be easy to get lost going down laws and when I'm rabbit holes. And people who might be looking at one meeting and not seeing the whole thing, wondering, what the heck are they doing? So that's a very general sort of vague comment.
Mr. Chair, can I just follow up on what Mr. Platt said? I agree wholeheartedly, when at our last meeting, when the whole topic came up in our discussion on the NSFAR preliminary plat, I made a comment about, here we're test driving. We're about to test drive our new, these amended regulations for the platting and subdivision regulation or resolution, sorry. In that it looked like our test drive crashed. And I guess what I'm hoping to be able to do with everybody's input somehow and with Mr. Ayers' help would be to reach back into the platting and subdivision resolution to provide the guardrails on how the Werman model is run so that we can put those guardrails in ahead of time and not end up with the car crash that we just had. We don't want to have an adversarial relationship with applicants. I think there was a certain amount of acknowledgement that we are seeing different numbers come in the model, and we would like to see more uniformity and consistency in that, but people aren't going to get there on their own, and we can't count on the Planning and Zoning Commission having the expertise to weigh in on it, and it feels really awful that we're weighing in on it after, when people are that far down the road. I don't even think the change that we're making now to get that Chapter 23 information before it goes to DEQ, I think we're still going to have very annoyed applicants that we're telling them what we think about their model parameters at a commission meeting instead of having it be more front loaded. So I'm trying to figure out how we can do that and how to reach agreement on numbers. I had sort of hoped that the first special meeting that we had with the applicant was going to be more technical minded about how do you determine the density of a house in the Werman model, the population density? Is it the census? Is it another number like the ones they use to size the absorption field? I think there's some things we can do to nail it down, and I feel like I'd like to make a stab at that, but I also know I need help in coming up with numbers and whether or not there's a way to incorporate in our concern about cumulative nitrate into those guardrails. So anyway, I'm also really uncomfortable with how that all went. We don't want to be adversarial. We want to have things be clear for applicants. And I'm gonna, try to figure out how to move forward on that. And I'll probably be tapping people on the shoulder to say, hey, what do you think, one-on-one, to see what we can do to move that forward, because it's totally unsatisfying for everyone involved. Thanks.
Yeah, and I'll add, I had a conversation with Mr. Tyne that he's been trying to put his mind to how to handle cumulative impacts. Well, that's a tough nut to crack, and Commissioner Hanning has brought that up with respect to his wind projects. It's a tough issue. DEQ has made it clear that they're not touching it. Some exchanges I had with John Wentz on it went to the point where it was quite interesting to see him, independent of all of us, suggest maybe what you guys need to do is in your zoning, define these are areas where we think this is the appropriate density, or where we want to see enhanced septics. And I think we've kind of had the similar discussion amongst ourselves. I was interested to hear it coming from John as an overlay. And that's going to take a lot of thinking, but that's active thinking, and I think that's where you were headed a little bit, isn't it, Mr. Stein?
You know, Mr. Chair, it is, and it kind of goes back to what I asked Mr. Ayers. So right now, and this won't happen in the future, there's 3 qualified hydrogeologists with a lot of experience. And I don't know how much experience, but it's way more years than I want. And what I think is I'm kind of stuck, because the 3 of us can't sit down and put ideas together and talk about them as professionals, because and that's why I asked Mr. Ayers, where's this line between 3 professionals sitting down and talking about a technical issue that can be solved? And the idea is to solve it so people can continue development. And then when the 3 of us talk, are we not commissioners? Or are, because then we can't talk if the 3 of us come together. And that to me just kind of slows the whole process down, because the bottom line here is just that I have is to fix the problem. This isn't rocket science, believe it or not. It's not insurmountable. There's lots of people who have faced this all over the country and dealt with it effectively. And Commissioner Hanning's exactly right. We have to provide clear, objective criteria for people who are making applications before the application. They need to come in and have all their ducks in a row, and everything can go forward rapidly. And clearly, the current process doesn't work, because otherwise we wouldn't see nitrate contamination out there where Howell was. As Mr. Platt pointed out, I understand that there's a theory that chug water has a lot higher nitrate or something like that. It's a theory. Do we want to go require the next step, which is don't just show me nitrate, show me estrogen, show me acetaminophen numbers, because fundamentally nitrate comes from septic systems. So if they're tapping into an aquifer with over 1 or 2, it's probably been contaminated, which says there's a lot of contact. I'm not trying to get technical here. I'm just saying there's a fundamental problem. And they admit that the Werman model only works on unconfined aquifers, and we're being told it's a confined aquifer. So, okay, good. We need some type of guideline for a confined aquifer. We need to consider cumulative impact so that we don't play, who's the last guy standing? An applicant comes in and he gets a 10, and it's 9.9 and 10.1 are the same. We all know that, but legitimately you can say 10, but somebody's going to get a 10, and then somebody else is going to get a 10, and the next person is going to get a 10. And what do? We just say no. We don't have a way to say, hey, you need an enhanced septic system. That would be the obvious one. So I'm still stuck on how this commission, this group, can move forward in an effective technical fashion to leave a technical legacy that solves these problems like Commissioner Hanning.
We could certainly have a special meeting. I don't know if the issue is.
No. We went through this last time, Vern. When somebody shows up with a lawyer, Mr. Ayers is exactly correct. When you have a special meeting where you're trying to solve technical problems and they bring their lawyer,
No, I'm
that's not a cooperative, you know.
My suggestion, Mr. Stein, is if we want to work this concept, we can have a work session amongst ourselves, not do it in the context.
Well, that's what I wanted Mr. Harris to kind of straighten out on.
Yeah, I suppose going back to that November special meeting day or day of special meetings, you had posed the question of, you know, what is kind of your role of your expertise and professional background on this commission, and it's absolutely allowed. I mean, that's the whole point. You know, I don't know. I cannot speak to, I guess, whatever rules may govern the practice of geology through, what is it, the State Board of Geologists? Yeah.
There's no problem there. I can tell you that. There's no restriction whatsoever in us meeting and talking. It's just when the three of us are planning and zoning commissioners, isn't that getting pretty close to a line here? Three of us get together. I remember from the original briefing that it was like, no, you can't get together with two other commissioners and
that would be
relevant subjects.
No, that would, I mean, that would just implicate the Public Meeting Act. And,
Right.
yeah, it just has to be held in a meeting. Because if, you know, three of you are talking directly about, you know, business, then that, that would violate the Public Meeting Act. But any sort of suggestion that you can't look at this using your professional experience or professional knowledge, that's wrong. That would be like saying if I were to be a private attorney and be on the Planning and Zoning Commission, I couldn't use my legal background. That's nonsense.
So mine is a practical question. How do the three of us get together and hash this out?
I would say a work session.
But would that be
and the difference is it wouldn't be within the confines of a specific application. It would be to work on the subdivision regulations.
Okay. And we would not have to make that a public process.
Well, it would be open to the public, but there would be no public comment. They would not be involved in the meeting.
Or they could be.
Or they could be if you wanted to, but you could notice it that there will be no public.
It goes to Commission Plans, if there was an error, which I'm not willing to concede, trying to perhaps do too much within the package of a specific application. So the solution to that is to take it outside of that package, as Mr. Harris has suggested, and we're free to do that.
Okay.
We can have a meeting about whatever we want, whatever we want. I'm not suggesting we do that in the next 2 months, but yes, this should be on our to-do list.
You could also state that it will be held at Starbucks.
And we could have it at Bud's Bar or whatever.
Altitude sounds like a good.
That's right. I was quite ingenuous in my embrace of Mr. Weinstein and Ms. Cardwell to give us their 2 bits worth and if play ball. Hooray.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Harris, for clarifying that for me.
As far as lessons learned, I'm perhaps a little more hard-nosed than Mr. Platt is inclined to be on this. Let's go be honest. We were appointed, each one of us, to this commission because for whatever reasons, the electeds thought we had something to contribute. I know in my own case, that was explicit. We want this science guy on the board. So no, there's no reason in the world we shouldn't exercise our expertise to the maximum benefit of those who appointed us. But I think the challenge to us is that we're not all going to be here, and I would like to leave this position with something more structural in place. Whether that's strict guidelines on the Werman model, my preference would be that we could get DEQ to step up and go played. And I understand this is a recorded conversation, but any implications that those guys aren't really focusing on reviewing these chapter 23s with rigor are well placed. It's true.
Well, we don't know. See, I don't know because I can't see what they did.
Well, and that's those of us.
I mean, you've been successful, Vern, getting the information by, I assume, Freedom of Information Act, that kind of thing. That, is that true?
I'm sorry, what?
You got information on how they did the chapter 23 with the Freedom of Information Act?
Well, I have experience with how these have been handled, and it's hit or miss.
Okay, so there's the problem right there. I agree. I would love to have the state do it. That'd be perfect. The state's not going to do it, as far as we know. And your experience, you're very experienced at this, is, well, sometimes they tell you and sometimes they don't. That's not really a very useful guideline for applicants coming forward who want to do it, and for people who want to expand and put in new subdivision. And so I don't have a lot of optimism.
Yeah, and my dream would be to include DEQ in this work session, or whatever we're calling it. Again, I'm not going to schedule the next 2 months, but that'd be ideal if we could bring those folks to this. And I think if the request is made at the appropriate level, maybe that's commissioner chair to head of water quality, they would deliver some folks to this technical work session that we would notice and conduct a vote.
That would be interesting.
Okay, so did you want to comment further on your?
No, thank you.
Okay. But we should not let our consultants fall into bad habits just because that's the way we've always done it.
I totally agree with that.
Okay, other comments from commissioners?
Mr. Chair, I just want to extend my congratulations to Mr. Ayers for his recent nuptials and wish him the best in his partnership. And we just hope we don't want you starting slacking off on us, okay?
Yeah, okay.
Then there's competition for our affection now. Here. All right, next meeting. We have a special meeting on January 3rd, which was scheduled for 5:30 at the Albany County Library. Is that correct? That is correct. All set up.
We'll be in a large meeting room.
Okay. And then our next regular meeting will be 5 o'clock here, January 11th. We will have a new member. And we will welcome our new member, whom I'm not particularly familiar with, but we'll assume the county commissioners did us right. Okay, there are no citizen comments because we have nobody else. We've worn them all down. So, any objections to an adjournment? Seeing none, we are adjourned. Thank you very much, and Merry Christmas.
Thanks all. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas. Thanks again, Keith.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can find.